Hello everyone, and welcome back to Haunted Bedtime. I know many of you tune in to these stories to help you drift off to sleep, so before you settle in, I'd love for each of you to leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. It all began back in the summer of 2017, when I first saw it, the thing that would change the way I looked at the world forever. It was one of those sights you don't forget, not even when you try. I remember the fear. It was cold and sharp, like the air right before dawn. For weeks after, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those eyes glowing in the darkness behind me. But as time passed, the fear slowly faded. I went on with my life. I convinced myself it was just a trick of the light, or a dream, or some animal I'd mistaken for something else. I told myself whatever I had seen wasn't real. But the memory never fully left me. Sometimes, in the early morning hours, I'd think about that night. Sometimes, at night, when the woods outside my window grew too quiet, I'd hear the echo of something moving through the trees. I pushed those thoughts away, but they always came back. Then 3 weeks ago, on that same stretch of road where it all began, I saw it again. It was almost surreal at first. The shape stepped out of the shadows, right there on the roadside, and turned to look at me. Its eyes burned like red embers, hot, deep, and hungry. But something about it was different this time. The creature looked older. It was beaten up, scarred, and worn. Deep claw marks raked its stomach and legs. A few teeth were missing, and what was left were yellowed and broken. Its fur was patchy and stained, like it had lived through 100 winters and fought through all of them. If it had looked terrifying before, now it looked ancient and wild, like a living nightmare that had survived things I could never imagine. For a long moment, it just stared at me. Then, as if it had all the time in the world, it started to run. I was in the car with my father, and as we sped up, the thing kept pace right beside us. It ran effortlessly, never falling behind. And I knew with a certainty that if it wanted to, it could have outpaced the car in a heartbeat. But it didn't. It just kept running, matching our speed, those burning eyes fixed on me. I couldn't look away. It was like it was daring me to try. The next time we saw it, it was around 9:30 in the evening. The sun was long gone, and the night was thick around the house. I was older now, 14, and old enough, my father said, to use a gun. After we told my grandparents about the creature, my grandpa handed me his old Remington and a handful of shells. My father, my grandpa, and I decided we would not go down without a fight. We stayed up all night, taking turns walking around the house, keeping watch out the windows, and listening for anything strange. We were all scared, but nobody said it out loud. The fear was just there in the air, between us, heavy and electric. We had to protect our family. That was the only thing that mattered. At first, everything was quiet, but as the hours dragged on, the creature began to appear, just at the edge of the woods, sometimes closer. Sometimes it would move in the shadows, just far enough that we couldn't see it clearly. Sometimes I'd see those red eyes glowing back at me through the glass. It never tried to get in, not at first. It just watched us. And every time I saw it, I felt the fear come rushing back, cold and sharp as ever. Then, suddenly, it leaped out of the darkness and landed right in front of the house. My heart stopped. And then, as we watched, another shape appeared behind it, another creature, moving slowly, creeping out from the shadows. I realized, with a cold twist in my stomach, that this one was younger, smaller. But the way it moved made my skin crawl. Now, there were two of them, and we were trapped. The power was out, and we had only a single flare and a few thundercrackers left. We had hours to go before dawn, and we knew we had to come up with a plan. We decided to use the thundercrackers as a distraction. We tossed them out onto the front yard, hoping the noise would draw the creatures in. It worked. Both of them crept forward, their bodies low to the ground, their eyes never leaving the house. The older one was in front, and the younger one moved along the roofline, almost invisible in the darkness. We fired the flare at them. The sudden burst of light and sound exploded in the yard. For a second, I hoped we might have scared them off, but instead, we heard a deep, guttural screech, a sound so raw and angry it made my hair stand on end. Instead of fleeing, the creature seemed to grow more enraged. The older one dropped to the ground, howling, while the younger one moved quick as lightning up onto the roof. Then, with a crash and a loud thud, we heard something break upstairs. I knew, in that moment, that it had gotten inside the house. Panic took over. My father, my grandpa, and I scattered, scrambling to hide anywhere we could find. I dove under a table draped with an old sheet and tried to steady my breathing. From my hiding place, I had a clear view of its legs, wolf-like paws, but with nails so long they scraped the floor with every step. Time seemed to stretch forever. The only sounds were the almost silent hisses and heavy breathing of the monsters as they prowled through the house, searching. I felt sure that, at any moment, those claws would sweep under the table and drag me out. But something changed. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was just that we couldn't wait any longer. My father, my grandpa, and I emerged from our hiding spots, shotguns and the old bolt-action rifle in hand. We unleashed everything we had, shell after shell, the shots echoing through the house. When the smoke finally cleared, the house was eerily quiet. The monsters were gone. There was no blood, no bodies, just a few paw prints on the floor, like the tracks of a stray dog. The fear lingered, thick and sour, as we searched the house from top to bottom. The next day, my grandma called a priest to bless the house. She moved quietly, her hands shaking as she clutched her rosary. I could see the worry in her eyes, the fear that whatever we'd faced wasn't finished with us yet. A few days later, my grandpa died. It was sudden and mysterious, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it had something to do with those creatures. Maybe it was just the fear, or maybe it was something more. Either way, life was never quite the same after that. Now, whenever I walk that stretch of road, I keep my eyes open and my hand close to my side. I remember the red eyes, the deep scars, and the way those things seem to move through the shadows. Some nights, I wonder if I'll ever see them again. Part of me hopes I won't, but part of me knows they're still out there, and they remember me too. It was late March of 2018 when it happened. Me and my friends had been out all day, just goofing around, doing the usual things teenagers do when there's nothing better to do in a small town in Wales. I remember how cold it was, how the last shreds of winter still clung to the world. The remains of the beast from the east littered the ground with icy patches and stubborn piles of old, crusted snow. Every time I spoke, my breath came out in little clouds, drifting away into the chilly air. By the time we realized how late it was, 6:30, maybe 7 in the evening, the sun had already set. The sky was a surreal blend of deep blue, streaks of orange and red fading away as night took over. We found ourselves a good distance from home, with no easy way back. So my friend Matt pulled out his phone and started fiddling with Google Maps, looking for the quickest way back to civilization. The route it spat out sent us through an old woodland trail, one built over an abandoned railway line that had been shut down since the 60s. Usually, it's a place filled with joggers, dog walkers, and cyclists. I'd biked down it myself plenty of times, but after that night, I doubt I'll ever want to go back. At first, there was nothing unusual. The trail snaked beneath the shadow of a mountain, and every so often, through gaps in the trees on our right, we could see clusters of houses glimmering in the distance, warm and inviting, but impossibly far away. The four of us trudged on, boots crunching over icy patches and frozen leaves, talking about nothing in particular, just happy to be together. We were about 1.5 miles in when I started to notice how quiet it had gotten. The valley that cradled the trail was usually alive with the distant roar of car engines, but that night, the noise of civilization seemed to have faded away completely. It made the silence feel deeper, almost oppressive. I could hear the birds, now quieting down for the night, and the rasping sound of our friend Kevin's asthmatic breathing. But something else, too, a faint rustling off to the right. It was the kind of sound you hear when someone tries to move quietly and fails. Not an animal bolting through the brush, but something more deliberate. Someone, or something, was out there, and it didn't want to be noticed. I didn't mention it to anyone. Maybe I thought I was being paranoid. Maybe I didn't want to spook the others. Either way, we pressed on, past the point of no return, the woods getting darker with each step. Shannon, who was never much for hiking after dark, finally broke the silence. "This wasn't a good idea," she said, her voice tense. "We're too far in now," Matt replied. "You should have called your parents if you wanted a lift." They argued, but nobody really wanted to turn back. The trail was already halfway done, and none of us were eager to walk the same way back. Not after how the darkness seemed to close in behind us. We were well past halfway, maybe 40 minutes into our walk, when we started using our phones as torches. We hadn't realized before that there was a flashlight app. We just used the camera flash, which barely lit up a few meters ahead. Still, it was better than nothing. That's when it happened. At first, it was just a sound, a heavy, rapid thudding, like hooves pounding the wet earth. It was coming fast, getting closer with every heartbeat. We all heard it, all four of us freezing at the same moment, fear trickling in. The noise drew closer and closer, then suddenly cut to the left, right in front of us, and we heard 4 hooves land with a smack on the concrete trail. Matt and I swung our lights toward the noise, and what we saw next is something I'll never forget. Standing there in the glow was, well, it looked like a buck deer at first. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized 3 things that made my blood run cold. First, there shouldn't have been a deer there. Not in that part of Wales. Deer don't come this far south. Second, its posture was all wrong. Its legs were splayed too far apart, like a person awkwardly imitating an animal. Its neck was too short, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. Third, and worst of all, were its eyes. They were too human. Wide, piercing, and blue. Like a man wearing a deer's face, or a deer that wanted you to think it was human. It stared at us for half a second. I locked eyes with it, and in that moment, I felt something inside me shrivel up with cold, animal terror. Then it bolted, moving in a way that was both animal and not. It used its front left and back right hooves together, then switched, almost like a person crawling at high speed, but with hooves. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. We just shared glances, the kind that said, "You saw that too, right?" And then we kept walking, all of us suddenly hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow. We'd aim our phone lights at the trees whenever we heard a branch snap, hearts pounding, waiting for it, or something else to come bursting out after us. The last 40 minutes dragged by in tense silence. When the orange glow of the housing estate finally appeared ahead, it was as if a dam broke. We sprinted the last 100 meters, desperate to be back under streetlights, to be anywhere but there. After that night, we barely spoke to each other for months. None of us wanted to talk about what happened, not really. Kevin tried to tell someone, but nobody believed him. After all, who would? It was unbelievable. Slowly we started talking again, but it was never quite the same. We knew what we saw. We all remembered those blue human eyes in the dark. I don't know what it was, if it was a skinwalker, even though we're not in America, or some sick, deformed deer, or something else entirely. Maybe it was nothing, and I'm just letting my imagination run wild. But deep down, I know that's not true. I know what I saw, and I know I'll never forget it. Now, every time I think about taking that trail again, I think about that thing, its wrong body, its human eyes, and the way it watched us from the dark, and I take a different route home. It happened 21 years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. I'm 35 now, but back then I was just a teenager, 19 years old, living on a quiet, sprawling farm in the middle of nowhere in Louisiana. My family had horses, cattle, chickens, and just about everything you'd expect from a real working farm. It was a peaceful place most of the time. The sort of place where the days blended into each other and the outside world felt far away. My father was the sort of man who never sat still. But about 2 weeks before all this happened, he'd twisted his ankle while trying to break in a wild mare. I took over for him, and in time, I managed to break her myself. She became mine, and I spent hours riding her along the old trails that cut through the woods at the edge of our property. But just as the first month of winter settled over us, strange things started to happen. At night, we'd hear the cattle panic in the darkness, their low, desperate cries echoing across the fields. Every time my father and I went to check, we'd find one of the calves missing. It was always the same, a patch of blood, the calf's hooves, and nothing else. No tracks, no drag marks, just emptiness and that uneasy feeling that something was wrong. My father was furious, but more than that, he was afraid. He set traps all along the edge of the woods, convinced it had to be a bear, even though there hadn't been many around for years. Every morning we'd check the traps. All we caught were the usual suspects: one red wolf, a handful of coyotes, a fox or two. But then one day, we came to the opening of a trail where he'd placed 2 big bear traps. Both traps were bent and twisted, warped out of shape like they'd been pried open by something impossibly strong. Thick, smelly black fur was stuck in the teeth of one of the traps, and there was a smear of blood on the ground. My father insisted it was a black bear, but something didn't sit right with me. I'd seen bears before, and I'd never seen one bend a steel trap like that. The next day, we drove to my uncle's house to pick up Max, my dog. Calling him a dog was stretching the truth, though. He was more wolf than anything, huge, loyal, and smart. My granddad had bred wolves, coyotes, and all sorts of wild animals for years, so I'd grown up with them. Max had been mine since he was a puppy, and there wasn't another creature on the planet I trusted more. Back at home, I spent the afternoon playing with Max. We tossed sticks. He followed me as I rode my mare around the pasture. And when we finally wore each other out, we collapsed under the old oak tree beside the barn. The sun was low, the air sharp with the smell of hay and wood smoke. For a while, everything felt normal. But then Max's ears shot up. He stood, staring at the edge of the woods, a deep growl rumbling from his chest. The hair along his back stood on end. I looked where he was looking, trying to see what had caught his attention, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the shadows beneath the trees and the cold winter wind rattling the branches. For what felt like an eternity, Max just stood there, watching, tense and ready. Then, as quickly as it started, he calmed down and looked at me, tail wagging softly. I tried to shake off the feeling that something was watching us, and I called him in for supper. The next day, my father was up in the loft of the barn, fiddling with something. When I climbed the ladder to check on him, I found him mounting a camera near the window. "We just might see what's doing this," he said, voice low. Next to him sat his hunting rifle and the old double-barreled shotgun we kept in the kitchen. "What do you plan on doing with those?" I asked. He glanced at me, his face hard and worried. "Whatever the hell is out there, we're going to stop it. But first, we need to bring the cattle closer so we have a clear shot if it shows up." We spent the rest of the afternoon moving the cattle to a spot in plain view of the barn. The sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, then slipped behind the trees. Night came fast, the air biting and cold. My father and I bundled up and climbed into the loft, huddling in the hay with Max sleeping somewhere below. We waited for hours, the darkness pressing in from all sides. I started to doze off, lulled by the silence and the gentle warmth of the hay. Then, just as I was slipping into sleep, something heavy rubbed against the side of the barn, knocking over a metal bucket. I bolted upright, heart pounding, and my father did the same. He peeked out the window, then let out a low, shaky, "Oh my God." I crawled to the window and looked. There, in the moonlight, was a massive shape, crouched low on all fours behind the oak tree. The same tree I liked to sit under. Its outline was wrong, too big, too hunched. My father raised the rifle, steadying his breath, finger tight on the trigger. I could see him brace himself, getting ready to fire. But then Max, still down in the barn, started barking and growling, a wild, furious sound. The creature whipped around, its head snapping toward us. Its eyes glowed a dark, ugly yellow. I'll never forget those eyes. They were full of hunger and rage, and even from 30 yards away I could feel the weight of its gaze like a punch to the chest. It began to growl, a sound so deep I could feel it in my bones. It slunk forward, slow at first, then faster, ready to pounce. My mind was spinning, my breath caught in my throat. My father squeezed the trigger and fired. The creature howled in pain, the shot echoing off the trees. My father grabbed my arm, shoving the guns into my hands, and we scrambled down the ladder. "Max!" I shouted. He was already by my side, hackles up, barking like a demon. Together, the 3 of us ran for the house, sprinting across the yard as fast as we could. I risked one last look over my shoulder and wished I hadn't. The thing was charging after us, every step shaking the ground. It was bleeding now, a dark red trail streaming from its left eye. My father yanked me inside, slammed the door, and locked all 3 locks. We ran through the house, bolting every window and door, hearts hammering. We hid in the family room, the only place in the house with no doors, only windows looking out into the dark. Max prowled from room to room, barking and snarling, while the creature circled the house, testing every entrance. It hammered at the front door, but whenever Max barked, it paused, hesitated. We waited, crouched in the middle of the house until the first pale light of dawn crept through the curtains. Only then did the noise stop. We waited a little longer, just to be sure. When we finally stepped outside, the world was strangely quiet. 2 of our horses lay dead in the pasture, their bodies twisted and broken. The rest of the animals had escaped, running off into the fields. The spot where we'd been watching from the barn was torn apart, the camera smashed to pieces, the hay scattered and stained with blood. In the weeks that followed, we tried to fix what was broken. My father rebuilt the barn, and I helped where I could. Whatever that thing was, it never came back. Eventually, I moved out, got married, started a life of my own. Years passed, but my father never stopped talking about that night. When I moved back to the farm with my wife and son, things felt different. My father was older, but still strong, still stubborn. He told me he never saw that thing again. I was glad, thinking it was over, that I could raise my boy on the same land I'd grown up on. I even got him a puppy, a wolf and pit bull mix named Oreo for her black and white fur. But there was one thing my father never let go of. He went back to that place, searched the woods, and eventually he found the eye he'd shot out of the creature that night. He kept it in a jar above his bed. He believed, truly believed, that as long as he kept that eye, those creatures would never come back. Sometimes late at night, when the wind shakes the windows and the shadows grow long, I still think about those dark yellow eyes, about the thing that almost got us. I wonder if it's really gone, or just waiting for someone else, in the cold woods at the edge of the farm. I live on the border of Ohio and West Virginia, surrounded by thick woods and rolling hills. My house sits on the edge of those woods, in the same place where I saw the man of the woods, something I'll never forget. Back then, I was younger, and I had a close group of friends I spent every weekend with. One autumn night, we gathered at my friend Jonah's house. We were outside, sitting around a crackling campfire, laughing and drinking, trying to make the night last as long as we could. When the fire started to burn low, Jonah stood up and said he'd get more wood. He disappeared around the side of the house, heading to the woodpile at the edge of the forest. We thought nothing of it. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Jonah didn't return. At first, nobody was too worried, but after 15 minutes, I started to feel uneasy. The firewood pile wasn't far away, just beyond the house, right where the darkness of the trees began. I told my friends I'd go check on him, then stood up and walked toward the back. The air was cold and quiet, with only the faint sound of the fire behind me. As I rounded the corner, I saw Jonah. He was just standing there, stiff and shaking, pale as a ghost. His eyes were wide, locked on something in the woods. I put my hand on his shoulder and asked if he was all right, but he barely reacted. Slowly, with a trembling arm, he pointed into the trees. I followed his finger and peered into the darkness. There, between the trunks, I saw a pair of huge, shining white eyes. They were so bright they almost glowed, and they stared back at us, unblinking. The eyes were just a few feet off the ground, so whatever was watching us was either short or it was crouching low. We stood there in the cold night, frozen in fear, not daring to move or even breathe. Then the thing in the woods began to rise. It stood up and up and up until it towered above the undergrowth. It wore a red plaid shirt and blue jeans, but it was impossibly tall, at least 9 feet, maybe more, and so thin it looked like a skeleton. It had no nose, no ears, and no hair, just those enormous shimmering eyes and a mouth that stretched inhumanly wide. I didn't even have time to shout. Both Jonah and I turned and ran. We bolted blindly into the trees, too terrified to look back. Branches whipped against my arms and face as I crashed through the underbrush. I quickly lost sight of Jonah, but I didn't care. I just had to get away from that thing. Behind me, I heard heavy, frantic footsteps, far too fast and heavy to belong to any person I knew. It sounded like whatever it was had dropped down on all fours and was tearing after me through the woods. Panic gave me strength I didn't know I had. I kept running, heart hammering in my chest, lungs burning. I risked a glance back and saw those same gleaming eyes locked onto me, chasing me through the dark. Then, out of nowhere, the ground gave way beneath my feet. I fell, tumbling about 5 feet down into a deep pit, a trap. I landed hard in a pile of leaves and dirt, dazed but alive. Above me a bell rang, loud and clear, echoing through the trees. Voices followed, shouting in excitement. "I think we got it," someone yelled. "We'll make that son of a pay." I realized then that local hunters had set this trap, hoping to catch the creature that had been stealing their kills. The thing that had been chasing me was what they were after. I pressed myself against the wall of the pit, barely daring to breathe. Suddenly, the shouts changed, from excitement to panic. The hunters must have seen the monster. I heard them scream, and then they were running, crashing through the brush, followed by the creature's shrill, unnatural shriek. The night fell quiet again, except for my own shaking breaths. I waited, then slowly climbed out of the pit. The hunters were gone, and so was the creature. But now I was alone, deep in the woods, with no idea where I was. Fear threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced myself to keep moving. If the hunters had been nearby, there had to be a camp somewhere. I walked for what felt like hours, stumbling through the darkness, until at last I saw the outline of a small cabin. The camp was empty. I found a bedroom and, exhausted beyond belief, collapsed on the bed and fell asleep almost instantly. I woke with a start to a piercing scream. I knew right away what it was. My blood ran cold as I slid under the bed, trying to make myself as small as possible. Outside, footsteps circled the cabin, slow, careful, as if searching for a way in. I held my breath, praying I wouldn't be found. Then I remembered the window. It was wide open on the other side of the cabin, and the footsteps were moving closer. My heart pounding, I made a plan. I crept out from under the bed and moved quietly to the front door. I swung it open, hoping to draw the creature away. I heard its feet thud against the floorboards as it charged for the door, and I sprinted for the back window, slipping out just as the monster burst inside. Once I was outside, I ran again. I couldn't help but look back, and I saw it. The creature was standing at the window, watching me. Its head was tilted, and its mouth was wet and red. It didn't chase me this time, it just stared. I ran through the trees, somehow finding my way home by dawn. Later, I checked a map. I had traveled almost 8 miles that night. I never saw Jonah or the hunters again. After Jonah's disappearance, my friends all moved away. I was the only one who stayed. To this day, I still call the thing I saw that night the Bubba Jacks. I have no real reason for the name, except it gives me chills just to say it. Sometimes, on cold autumn nights, I still think I see its eyes, watching from the shadows at the edge of the woods. I risked one last look over my shoulder and wished I hadn't. The thing was charging after us, every step shaking the ground. It was bleeding now, a dark red trail streaming from its left eye. My father yanked me inside, slammed the door, and locked all 3 locks. We ran through the house, bolting every window and door, hearts hammering. We hid in the family room, the only place in the house with no doors, only windows looking out into the dark. Max prowled from room to room, barking and snarling, while the creature circled the house, testing every entrance. It hammered at the front door, but whenever Max barked, it paused, hesitated. We waited, crouched in the middle of the house until the first pale light of dawn crept through the curtains. Only then did the noise stop. We waited a little longer, just to be sure. When we finally stepped outside, the world was strangely quiet. 2 of our horses lay dead in the pasture, their bodies twisted and broken. The rest of the animals had escaped, running off into the fields. The spot where we'd been watching from the barn was torn apart, the camera smashed to pieces, the hay scattered and stained with blood. In the weeks that followed, we tried to fix what was broken. My father rebuilt the barn, and I helped where I could. Whatever that thing was, it never came back. Eventually, I moved out, got married, started a life of my own. Years passed, but my father never stopped talking about that night. When I moved back to the farm with my wife and son, things felt different. My father was older, but still strong, still stubborn. He told me he never saw that thing again. I was glad. thinking it was over, that I could raise my boy on the same land I'd grown up on. I even got him a puppy, a wolf and pit bull mix named Oreo for her black and white fur. But there was one thing my father never let go of. He went back to that place, searched the woods, and eventually he found the eye he'd shot out of the creature that night. It was around 3 a.m. when all this began. I was driving my old Fiat down a wooded street, even though, technically, I wasn't supposed to be. My driver's license had long since expired. But what can I say? Sometimes a man just has to drive. I hadn't been able to sleep anyway. Earlier that afternoon, I'd spotted several suspicious, goblin-like figures skulking on my porch. So, when a solicitor called about a highly beneficial seminar in Gaithersburg, Maryland, I was actually glad for the distraction. The call came so late at night I should have been annoyed. But I was just awake enough not to care. In my excitement, I slammed the phone down without getting an actual address. I figured I'd just follow the context clues once I got there. So there I was, barreling down an empty road surrounded by dark woods, nothing but trees on either side, road in front and behind. It was only after a while that I realized I'd forgotten to turn on my headlights. Once those were on, I kept cruising, only stopping here and there to slam the passenger door shut. Damage from a previous late-night drive had left it loose and rattling. I was making pretty good time until a massive tree, toppled right across the asphalt, blocked my path. Under normal circumstances, I would have just rammed through anything in my way, but this tree was huge enough to make me pause. Annoyed, but too stubborn to head home, I did the next thing that popped into my mind. Another decision I'll forever regret. I turned the steering wheel and nosed my Fiat straight into the dark abyss of the forest. Instantly, I realized my mistake. The ground beneath the car sloped steeply downward, and in my shock, I forgot to engage the handbrake. My car tumbled and jolted through the undergrowth, the steering wheel yanked out of my hands. It wasn't until I slammed headfirst into a boulder that I finally came to a stop. I climbed out and looked around. Nothing looked familiar. The car was finished, dead in the woods. Normally, the sight of my beloved Fiat all busted up would have brought tears to my eyes, but survival mode had kicked in. At least, she went out in the line of duty. I pulled out my only source of light, a Sonic the Hedgehog keychain flashlight. The beam projected Sonic's head, charming but not exactly ideal for lighting up the woods. Still, it was better than nothing. I remembered that my house was on North Point Street, so I figured I'd walk north. Using the old moss on the rocks trick, I tried to set my direction. I'd already given up on making it to the seminar, which was a shame, since the fortune I was promised would have let me quit my job at the grocery store. I hate that job, and as an act of protest, I'm always passive-aggressive with my manager Ricardo when he asks me to do anything. I trudged through the woods for what felt like forever. Eventually, the Sonic flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in a moonlit clearing. I sat down on a tree stump to catch my breath and figure out my next move. That's when I heard a faint rustling, leaves brushing together in the wind. I tensed, eyes darting around for any sign of life. Then, out of nowhere, a sharp thwack echoed from the treetops. I leaped up and started smacking my flashlight, desperate to get it working again as the noises grew closer. Finally, the little Sonic head beam flickered back to life. I swung the beam toward the wall of trees, and what I saw nearly made me drop the flashlight. Standing among the shadows was a man, or at least something shaped like a man, with thick, bark-like skin. His face was a grotesque parody of what a human face should be, arms as thick as 3 bodybuilders put together. I couldn't tell if this was some kind of ent, like in Lord of the Rings. I know Tolkien drew on old folklore, and goblins are real in Europe, so maybe ents are too, or maybe this was a poor soul cursed by a witch to live as a tree. Either way, whoever or whatever had done this might still be lurking. I ran like my life depended on it, because it did. I sprinted through the trees, only stopping to flash the Sonic light behind me. Every time, the Barkman was there, looming and relentless. My legs burned, but I pushed on, feeling less like a man and more like a Fiat on a mission. At last I felt the soft, smooth surface of tarmac beneath my feet and saw the glow of approaching headlights. It wasn't just any car that stopped for me. It was a Fiat Punto Evo, Number 8 on my all-time favorite cars list. I waved the driver down, and, true to the reputation of Fiat owners, he was happy to help. He rolled down the window and agreed to give me a lift home. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if I'd let that tree creature catch up to me. Maybe I'd be standing rooted in that clearing, just another part of the forest, waiting for the next unlucky soul to wander through. It all started back in the summer of 2017, the first time I saw it. I remember being terrified for quite a while, but eventually the fear faded and life went on. I should mention that all of this took place partly in the early morning hours and partly at night. But then, just 3 weeks ago, on that same road where I'd seen it before, I saw it again. This time, those red, ember-like eyes stared right into my soul. But something was different. The creature looked weird and distorted, not quite like the one I'd seen a year and a half ago. This one looked old, much older. Its fur was ragged, and there were deep claw marks in its stomach and legs. A few of its teeth were missing, and its fur was stained. You could tell it had been through a lot of fights. Suddenly, it was running alongside our car, keeping pace with us as if it could pass us if it wanted to, but it didn't. The next time we saw it was one evening around 9:30 p.m. My grandparents were at the house, and now that I was older, 14, I was finally allowed to use a gun. I grabbed my grandpa's old Remington and loaded it with 5 shells. My father, my grandpa, and I decided to stay up all night, taking turns walking around the house and watching through the windows. Every so often, the creature would appear, and each time, my heart would pound with fear. But I knew we had to protect our family. At first, there was no sign of it for a long time. Then, suddenly, the thing leaped in front of the house, and right behind it, another silhouette slowly appeared. Now, we were really scared. We were basically trapped in the house with only a few hours left until dawn. The power had gone out, and all we had was a single flare and some thundercrackers. We threw the thundercrackers out in front of the creatures. For a moment, they just stared at them. Then the second one stepped into view. It didn't look like the first creature from all those years ago, but it was definitely younger. Our plan was desperate. Both creatures were distracted by the thundercrackers, so we fired the flare at them. The explosion was huge, and I heard a fading, screeching sound that chilled me to the bone. We thought maybe we had gotten them, but instead, we just made them angrier. The older ones stayed on the ground while the younger ones suddenly climbed onto the roof. Then, we heard a loud crash from upstairs and a heavy thud. That's when we knew one of the creatures had gotten inside the house. All of us scrambled. We hid wherever we could, under cupboards, behind furniture. I crawled under a table, draped with a sheet, and could see the creature's legs. They looked like wolf paws, but the nails were much longer. For nearly an hour, we hid in silence, only hearing the almost silent hissing sounds the creatures made as they crept through the house. I honestly thought that was it for us. But at that moment, we knew it was now or never. My dad, my grandpa, and I grabbed our weapons, 2 shotguns and a bolt-action rifle, and went wild, firing at anything that moved. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing. No bodies, no blood. Only a few large, dog-like footprints on the floor. After that, my grandma called a priest to come and bless the house. But after that night, something strange happened. My grandpa, who had helped protect us, passed away suddenly and mysteriously. Deep down, I can't help but feel that it had something to do with those monsters. I recently moved west to Arizona. I'm a devout Christian, and honestly, until this happened, I never believed there was any creature out there that we couldn't eventually find or deal with using all the modern technology we have. I mean, it's 2019, for heaven's sake. If we want to find something, you'd think we could. My story begins on December 23rd, 2018. I was already living in Arizona by then, a bit north of Phoenix. That night, my friends and I, feeling the Christmas spirit, decided to head out together about 5 miles north of town, deep into the forest. It was cold, really cold. Some of my friends were shivering, and it was clear they hadn't dressed warmly enough. Even though I was layered up, the wind and the chill still cut right through my jacket. We wanted to make a bonfire that night and just hang out, warming up and sharing a few drinks. But right when I got in the car, something felt off. I had this uneasy, sick feeling in my stomach, and something in me just wanted to stay home. I couldn't figure out why, so I tried to ignore it. I picked up my friends and headed out, just like we always did. Usually, I feel at peace in the forest. I'm a big nature lover. But that night, something was wrong. It sounds cliché, but I truly felt like something was watching me. And as we walked further down the trail, far enough that it would have been a pain to turn back, it finally hit me why I was so uneasy. I remembered coming out to this same spot during the summer, just a few months before. We weren't very familiar with the area. It wasn't a usual hangout for us. That summer night, we had come out for the same reason, drinks and a bonfire. I hadn't had any alcohol that night, so I was the one in charge of gathering firewood. I didn't mind. It gave me a chance to look around and get a feel for the area. But as soon as I stepped away from the bonfire's light, things got weird. At the edge of the glow, in the shadows near the trees, I caught the tiniest glimpse of something darting behind a tall pine. I called back to my friends, asking if it was normal for other people to be hanging around out here. They didn't answer, just kept drinking and laughing. I took a few more steps, keeping my eyes fixed on where I'd seen that shadow. It moved in this odd, bobbing way, almost like it was floating. I couldn't imagine why someone would be out here playing tricks, but before I could say anything, I realized I physically couldn't speak. Something deep inside me just wouldn't let me make a sound. Just as quickly as it had appeared, the shadow shot away, fast as a bullet. I fell backward, kicking around in the dirt, totally spooked. My friends saw this and just laughed, thinking I was drunk. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but they only looked at me like I was crazy. For the rest of the night, I stayed close to the fire and refused to step into the dark. So now, walking down that same trail in December, I remembered every detail from the summer. My stomach dropped. My friends, already tipsy, started slurring Christmas carols and joking around. I thought about telling them, but knew they wouldn't believe me, so I just prayed for the best and kept walking. That turned out to be a huge mistake. I hadn't drunk much that night, either. I'm not much of a drinker anyway, usually the sober one who makes sure everyone gets home safe. Still, to calm my nerves, I had a little rum. It was Christmas after all, and it helped me relax. We all started to enjoy ourselves, just laughing, singing, and soaking in the holiday feeling around the fire. Eventually, I needed to use the bathroom, so I wandered about 150 feet from the fire, just far enough that nobody could see me. I could still hear my friends' voices echoing through the woods. Suddenly, from behind me, I heard my friend Corbin calling my name. I'll admit, I was a little tipsy, but not enough to mistake what happened next for something in my head. I yelled back for him to wait, finished up, and stepped out from behind a tree to see what he wanted. But it wasn't Corbin standing there. It wasn't anybody human. It took me a second to realize what I was looking at, and I'm grateful I stopped in my tracks. The thing in front of me was at least 6 or 7 feet tall. Its eyes burned like fire. It moved from a dog-like crouch to a towering, upright position. The moonlight made its dark, skinny body shine in an unnatural way. It had clawed feet, and its whole presence felt like evil itself. I broke down. I started to sob, overwhelmed by panic. Every second felt like an eternity, and all I could think was that this was the end. I fell to my knees and did the only thing I could think of. I started to pray. To me, in that moment, this creature had to be the devil. I couldn't imagine anything worse. It hated my prayers. It let out an unholy shriek, a sound like someone singing underwater, all warped and terrible. I screamed and somehow found the strength to throw myself backwards, scrambling frantically through the forest floor. I ran, stumbling and falling, not caring about anything except getting away from that thing. When I finally made it back to the bonfire, I was covered in dirt, sweat, and tears. I could barely breathe as I tried to explain what happened to my friends. I could tell they doubted me, thought maybe I'd just had too much to drink. I was so scared, I think I might have actually had a small seizure, because everything after that was a blur. I vaguely remember staggering back to the truck and leaving. I woke up the next day to a flood of texts from my friends asking if I was okay. But the last thing I remember from that night, the thing I can't forget, is seeing the creature smile at me through the trees, right before it skittered off and disappeared. Our plan was desperate. Both creatures were distracted by the thundercrackers, so we fired the flare at them. The explosion was huge, and I heard a fading, screeching sound that chilled me to the bone. We thought maybe we had gotten them, but instead, we just made them angrier. The older ones stayed on the ground while the younger ones suddenly climbed onto the roof. Then, we heard a loud crash from upstairs and a heavy thud. That's when we knew one of the creatures had gotten inside the house. All of us scrambled. We hid wherever we could, under cupboards, behind furniture. I crawled under a table, draped with a sheet, and could see the creature's legs. They looked like wolf paws, but the nails were much longer. For nearly an hour, we hid in silence, only hearing the almost silent hissing sounds the creatures made as they crept through the house. I honestly thought that was it for us. But at that moment, we knew it was now or never. My dad, my grandpa, and I grabbed our weapons, 2 shotguns and a bolt-action rifle, and went wild, firing at anything that moved. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing. No bodies, no blood. Only a few large, dog-like footprints on the floor. After that, my grandma called a priest to come and bless the house. But after that night, something strange happened. My grandpa, who had helped protect us, passed away suddenly and mysteriously. Deep down, I can't help but feel that it had something to do with those monsters. I know how this sounds. If I were you, I wouldn't believe it either. But you don't have to believe me. All I can say is this: for the love of God and everything holy, never forget that we aren't alone on this earth. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. It all began in the summer of 2017, a time that still feels like a strange dream even today. I remember the feeling of freedom in the air, that lazy heat pressing down on the empty country roads, the slow, peaceful evenings that seemed to stretch forever. Life was simple back then, or maybe it only feels that way now, looking back. I was just a kid, still young enough to see magic and danger hiding in the shadows, old enough to want to chase it down, not run away. That summer, I had my first real brush with something I could never explain, something that would haunt me for years. But when it happened, I had no idea how deeply it would carve itself into my mind. It happened early one morning, when the world was still half asleep, and the light outside was dim and blue. I had gone with my father and grandfather to visit my grandparents' house in the countryside. Their place was tucked away at the end of a winding gravel road, the kind of road that only locals ever used. On both sides, the trees pressed in close, their trunks standing like silent guards, their leaves rustling whenever a soft breeze wandered by. It was the kind of place where you could step outside and feel like you were the only person alive for miles. The peace there felt absolute, but sometimes in the very heart of peace, something can shatter that feeling forever. On that day, as the sun was still rising and a thin mist hovered just above the grass, I found myself awake before anyone else. I remember feeling restless, too wired to stay inside, so I slipped out onto the porch in my pajamas, the boards creaking softly under my feet. There was something about that morning, a tension in the air I didn't notice at first. I stood there for a long time, just watching the mist curl and drift across the fields, listening to the distant call of birds waking up. I could smell the dew on the grass, the earth itself almost steaming in the soft sunlight. That was when I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. There, at the edge of the woods, something moved. Not a deer or a fox or any animal I had seen before, but something darker, larger, almost blending in with the shadows. I stared, heart pounding. 2 red eyes burned through the gloom, glowing almost like hot embers left in a dying fire. The shape behind them was all wrong, misshapen and hunched, its fur bristling in the weak morning light. I couldn't move, couldn't even call out. It was like those eyes reached inside me and squeezed, holding me still with fear and a strange fascination. The creature watched me for what felt like forever, then slipped back into the woods, silent as a ghost. When it was gone, I stumbled inside, shaking, but by the time I found my voice and tried to tell anyone, the words came out jumbled and ridiculous. My father smiled and ruffled my hair. Bad dreams, huh? He said. My grandfather laughed and said the only thing hiding in those woods were rabbits and old beer cans. For a while, I believed them. I let myself forget, or tried to. I pushed the memory aside, told myself it was just a trick of the light, a story my mind had invented to make an ordinary morning special. But I couldn't quite let it go. Sometimes, late at night, I'd remember those burning eyes, and the fear would come rushing back. As the weeks passed, though, the terror faded, and life moved on. By the time summer turned to fall, I almost managed to convince myself that nothing had happened at all. A year and a half later, I was older, 14, old enough to feel like an adult sometimes, even if I was still just a kid in many ways. I'd learned a little more about the world, seen some of its uglier sides, but nothing prepared me for what was coming. It was late fall when we went back to my grandparents' house, the air sharper and the nights falling faster. The countryside felt different in the cold, more dangerous maybe, or maybe I was just remembering that old fear I'd tried so hard to forget. We arrived just before sunset, the sky streaked with red and orange. My grandfather was sitting on the porch, cleaning an old Remington rifle he hadn't used in years. I asked if I could try it, and after a moment's hesitation, he agreed. "You're old enough to know how to be careful," he said. He loaded 5 shells and showed me how to hold it, how to aim. The gun felt heavy in my hands, almost too big for me, but I felt a strange sense of power holding it. That night, after dinner, my father, grandfather, and I sat around the kitchen table, talking quietly. The house felt different in the dark. Every creak and groan of the old boards seemed to echo louder, the wind scratching at the windows. The power flickered once or twice, then finally went out altogether. My grandmother brought out a box of candles and we lit them, placing them on every surface until the house was filled with small, wavering lights. We took turns walking from window to window, peering out into the darkness, watching for anything unusual. I tried to laugh it off, to act brave, but inside I was terrified. I kept thinking of those eyes, that terrible gaze holding me frozen on the porch so long ago. Hours passed. Sometimes I caught a glimpse of something moving outside. Just a shadow, I told myself, just the wind in the trees. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, circling, waiting. Then, just after midnight, it happened. There was a crash from the front of the house, a sudden, violent sound like something huge leaping onto the porch. We rushed to the window, and there it was again, the same creature, but older, more battered, its fur scarred with deep claw marks, its eyes burning even brighter than before. Behind it, another silhouette moved, a second creature, smaller and leaner, but just as terrifying. My grandfather swore softly and loaded the rifle. My father grabbed a shotgun, and I held my breath, heart pounding so loud I thought it would give us away. We waited, not sure what to do, paralyzed by fear. The creatures prowled around the house, their eyes glinting in the candlelight, sometimes disappearing, sometimes reappearing so close I could almost see their breath fogging the cold night air. We were trapped, pinned inside by monsters I never thought could exist. With only a few hours left until dawn, we had to come up with a plan. The power was still out, and all we had were a single flare and a handful of thundercrackers left over from 4th of July. My grandfather whispered that the thundercrackers might scare the creatures, at least for a moment. We gathered them up and waited by the front door, hands shaking. When the creatures paused in the yard, we hurled the thundercrackers out onto the porch. They exploded in a shower of sparks and sound, filling the night with smoke and flashes of light. The older creature flinched, stepping back, while the younger one crouched low, eyes narrowed. I could see the hate and hunger in their faces. But the plan didn't work for long. The creatures regrouped, their eyes fixed on the house. The older one dropped to the ground, growling, while the younger leaped onto the roof with a crash that made the whole house shake. My father fired the flare at the roof, hoping to scare them away, but instead there was a massive explosion of light and a fading, bone-chilling screech. For a moment we thought we'd won, that we'd driven them off. But then the house shook again, harder than before, and I heard the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against the shingles. Something heavy crashed through an upstairs window, a shattering of glass that sent my grandmother screaming. We scrambled for cover, diving under tables and into cupboards. I found myself hiding beneath a table draped with a heavy sheet, my breath shallow and silent, heart pounding so hard I thought I might faint. Through a gap in the fabric, I could see the creature's legs as it prowled the hallway. Wolf-like paws, but longer, with wicked, curving claws that scraped the floor. We hid like that for what felt like hours, listening to the creatures make their way through the house, uttering almost silent hisses, searching for us. Every time their footsteps paused nearby, I held my breath, sure I was about to die. The fear was so thick I could taste it, sharp and bitter in my mouth. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, the creatures seemed to grow restless. There was a last, echoing screech, and then the footsteps receded, fading into silence. We waited, barely daring to breathe, until we were sure they were gone. When we finally emerged, the house was a disaster. Windows shattered, furniture overturned, deep claw marks gouged into the walls and floors. My grandmother was sobbing quietly, rocking back and forth in her chair. My father and grandfather checked every room, guns drawn, but the only sign of the creatures were muddy paw prints and a cold, lingering dread. The next morning, my grandmother called the local priest to bless the house. She hung crosses over every door and sprinkled holy water in every corner. I watched her, still numb with fear, feeling like a stranger in my own home. But the strangest part was what we found outside. The porch was torn apart, the yard churned up with claw marks and footprints. In the middle of the lawn, we found the shells from the rifle, spent and scattered, but not a single drop of blood. It was as if the creatures had never been there at all, except for the terrible destruction they left behind. That was the last time we saw them, at least for a while. Life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after something like that. But I never really felt safe again, not in that house, not in those woods. Every time I heard a branch snap or a dog bark in the distance, my heart would race, expecting those red eyes to appear in the darkness. A few weeks later, my grandfather fell ill. He grew weaker and weaker, no matter what the doctors did. I sat with him in the hospital, holding his hand as he slipped in and out of sleep. Sometimes, in his fevered dreams, he would mutter about the creatures, about the eyes that burned in the night. I never told anyone what he said, never admitted that I believed him. After he died, I tried to put it all behind me. But the memory lingers, the fear, the horror, the knowledge that there are things in this world we can't explain, things that watch us from the shadows and slip away when the sun rises. Now, every time I go back to my grandparents' house, I find myself staring into the woods, searching for a glimpse of red eyes in the darkness. Sometimes, late at night, I think I hear them. Soft footsteps, a low growl, the echo of a screech that still haunts my dreams. And I know, deep down, that they're still out there, waiting. Maybe they always have been. Maybe they always will be. I remember every detail of those nights, the fear, the helplessness, the way the world felt so much bigger and stranger than I ever knew. I remember the way my father held the shotgun, his hands trembling but his eyes steady. I remember my grandmother's prayers, whispered into the darkness, her tears shining in the candlelight. I remember my grandfather's stories, the way he laughed off the idea of monsters until he saw them for himself. I wish I could say that I found answers, that I learned what those creatures were or where they came from. But the truth is, some mysteries never get solved. Some monsters never go away. All we can do is keep living, keep moving forward, and hope that, if we ever meet them again, we'll be ready. Sometimes I lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what would have happened if we hadn't hidden, if we had tried to fight, if the flare had found its mark. I wonder if the creatures remember us, if they carry their own scars from that night. And I wonder most of all if there are other families out there, other people like me who have seen the impossible and lived to tell the tale. I hope so. I hope I'm not alone. Because once you've seen the eyes burning in the darkness, once you've felt the cold breath of fear against your skin, you're never the same again. You learn to listen to the silence, to watch the shadows, to trust the feeling in your gut that says, something is out there, and you never ever forget. Even now, years later, I still keep the old Remington rifle close by, just in case. I still check the windows before I go to sleep, still listen for the telltale sound of claws on the porch. I still pray sometimes that I'll never see those red eyes again, But deep down, I know the truth. The monsters are real. And sometimes, they come back. My parents grew up in a small town at the very northern edge of Jefferson County, Alabama. The area was quiet, filled with green woods and slow, winding rivers, and everyone knew everyone else by name. Life moved at a gentle pace back in those days, especially in the late 1960s, when the story I'm about to tell you took place. Back then, there was not much for teenagers to do in town. There weren't any movie theaters nearby, and the nearest bowling alley was more than an hour's drive away. Most kids found their fun outdoors, making their own entertainment. On warm evenings, the local teens would gather by the old bridge over the Locust Fork River. It was a kind of unspoken meeting spot. Kids would sit on the hoods of their cars, listening to the radio, sharing stories, and waiting to see who else would show up. The river below was dark and deep, the trees around it thick and quiet, and the only light came from the occasional flickering street lamp and the yellow glow of headlights as cars rolled in. One night, my mom and dad decided to head out to the bridge, just like everyone else. They drove down the winding road in my father's old car, the tires crunching on gravel as they pulled up near the riverbank. When they arrived, they realized that they were the first ones there. The area was empty except for the sound of insects singing in the trees and the soft rush of water moving below the bridge. They parked the car under one of the few streetlights and settled in to wait, hoping some friends might show up later. As they waited, my dad rolled down the window and leaned back, listening to the night. The air was cool, the kind of cool that sinks into your bones in the Alabama night. He wasn't worried about anything, just enjoying the stillness with my mom, who sat beside him, humming along to a song on the radio. But then, slowly, a strange sound began to rise up from the darkness. It started out as a faint, high-pitched whistling, so soft it could have been mistaken for the wind. At first, my dad ignored it, thinking it was just the river or maybe a bird hidden in the shadows. But as the minutes passed, the sound grew steadily louder and sharper until it seemed to echo across the entire riverbank. My mom stopped humming and looked around, feeling uneasy. She reached for my dad's arm, her fingers curling around his sleeve. Trying not to seem worried, my dad told her it was probably nothing. Still, the whistling didn't stop. It kept coming, over and over, like someone blowing across the top of a bottle, but deeper, more insistent. My dad frowned and wondered if maybe the car had a problem. Maybe air was leaking out of one of the tires. He got out of the car, the gravel crunching beneath his boots, and walked slowly around to check the wheels. But as soon as he stepped out into the cool air, he realized the sound wasn't coming from the car at all. He listened carefully, and now he could tell the noise was drifting up from somewhere in the woods, down on the riverbank itself. It was closer now, much louder than before, and it made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. It was an odd sort of whistle, not the kind you'd expect from any animal or bird he'd ever heard. He took a few steps closer to the trees, peering into the darkness, but couldn't see anything except shadows moving in the breeze. Back in the car, my mom was starting to get really nervous. She called out, her voice shaky, telling him to come back. She said she had a bad feeling about the whole thing and she wanted to leave. My dad didn't argue with her. Even he was feeling unsettled now, and the last thing he wanted was for something to happen to either of them. So he quickly got back in the car, started the engine, and drove away. His headlights sweeping over the silent trees as they headed back up the hill towards town. They didn't say much on the drive home, each of them lost in their own thoughts. My dad kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone, or something, following them up the road. But the only thing behind them was the darkness, thick and unbroken. 2 days passed, and the odd memory of the whistling sound faded into the background. It was a Sunday afternoon when one of my dad's friends stopped by and asked if he could use a hand with something. He explained that he needed to retrieve a small boat he had left on the riverbank a few days earlier, after a late-night fishing trip. He and some other friends had gone out trot-lining for catfish that Friday night, but something had happened that made them leave their boat behind. My dad was curious, and he was always willing to help a friend, so he agreed to go along. They set off in another boat, planning to troll up the river, retrieve the first boat, and bring both of them back down to the bridge and boat launch. As they motored quietly up the river, the water dark and smooth as glass beneath them, my dad's friend pointed out a spot along the shore. "That's where we left it," he said. "Right there, on the bank. There's no road through the pasture, so we figured this would be the easiest way." As they got closer, my dad noticed something strange. There was a campsite by the river, but it didn't look right. The tent was knocked down, half collapsed on the muddy ground. The remains of a fire still smoldered in the ring of rocks nearby, sending up thin trails of smoke that curled into the trees. An axe was stuck deep in the trunk of a tree, and coolers, chairs, and all sorts of camping gear were scattered about as if people had left in a big hurry. There was no sign of anyone around, not a single voice, not even the bark of a dog. It was as if whoever had been there had simply disappeared. My dad and his friend climbed ashore, looking around. It gave both of them an uneasy feeling. Everything had been abandoned, left behind in a rush. The ground was muddy and trampled, but there were no clear footprints. Just that lingering smell of smoke and the stillness of the woods pressing in from every side. Trying to lighten the mood, my dad's friend made a joke. He said, "I guess that whistling creature must have run them off too." He chuckled, but his laugh didn't last long. My dad turned to him, a strange look on his face, and asked him to repeat what he'd just said. "Yeah," his friend replied. "Friday night, when we were out here fishing, we heard something weird. Some kind of animal or something started making this whistling noise across the river. We thought it was just the wind at first, but it kept getting louder. It followed us down the river, always just out of sight." My dad's friend went on to explain that, at first, none of them paid much attention to the sound. There were 3 of them in the boat, sitting quietly, waiting for the right time to run the lines. But the whistling kept coming, rising and falling, almost like it was watching them, moving whenever they moved. Every time they drifted a little further downstream, the sound would follow, echoing through the trees and off the water. After a while, the noise started to get on their nerves. One of the guys, who'd brought a .22 rifle in case they ran into any snakes, tried firing off a few shots into the trees. The noise would stop for a moment, but almost as soon as the echoes died away, the whistling would start again, sometimes from even closer than before. Then there would be a rush of noise, like something heavy crashing through the brush, and the whistling would turn into loud, frantic rustling along the water's edge. It didn't take long for the men to get spooked. They decided to call it quits for the night, even though they hadn't caught many fish. Instead of bringing the boat back up the hill to the road, they tied it up on the friend's land and left everything where it was. They just wanted to get away from the riverbank, from whatever was making that noise. As my dad listened to his friend's story, he realized it sounded exactly like what he and my mom had experienced just a few miles down the river at the bridge. The same strange whistling, the same feeling of being watched, the same sense that something was lurking just beyond the circle of light. For years, neither my dad nor his friend really knew what to make of what happened. It was just one of those strange memories that lived in the back of their minds. The kind of thing you talk about late at night or when the wind whistles through the trees and you remember being young and afraid. No one in town ever connected the whistling sound to Bigfoot or any kind of legend, at least not until much later. Life moved on, the story faded, and people grew older, focusing on new problems, new worries, and the everyday routine. Then, not long ago, everything changed with a simple TV show. I was at home, flipping through channels, when I stumbled across a program called Destination America, Terror in the Woods. It was Season 1, Episode 3, and the title of the episode was Hunted by Bigfoot. I didn't think much of it at first, but then, halfway through the episode, 2 men started talking about a strange whistling noise they'd heard in the woods. They described it as sounding almost like air leaking from a tire, exactly the way my dad had described it all those years ago. When I heard that, I sat up straight. My heart pounded in my chest. I grabbed the remote and hit the record button so I wouldn't miss a second. Then I went into the kitchen, found my dad, and told him he needed to come and watch something right away. He looked a little puzzled but followed me to the living room. We sat down together, and I played the segment. As the men on TV talked about their experience, describing the same high-pitched, eerie whistle and the strange feeling of being watched, I watched my dad's face. I've never seen him look like that before. It was almost as if he'd seen a ghost. He was quiet for a long time, his eyes glued to the screen, and when the episode finished, he turned to me, his face pale. "That was 47 years ago," he whispered, almost in disbelief. It was like he was stunned, hearing his own memory echoed back at him after so many decades. For years, he'd carried that story inside him, unsure what to make of it. And suddenly, here were strangers from another state describing almost the exact same thing. I couldn't tell if my dad felt relieved or if he was more unsettled than ever. Maybe it helped to know he wasn't the only one who had experienced something like that. Maybe it was just strange to realize that some mysteries from the past never really go away, and that sometimes the things we remember are more real than we want to admit. Since then, I've thought a lot about that night by the river and about the abandoned campsite and the terrified fishermen. My parents are honest, decent people. They are Christians who believe in telling the truth, and they have never been the kind to make up stories just for the fun of it. I know that what they told me really happened, even if none of us will ever be able to fully explain it. Was it Bigfoot? Was it some animal no one has ever seen? Was it just the wind playing tricks on a bunch of nervous teenagers and fishermen in the dark Alabama woods? Maybe we'll never really know. Maybe there are things out there we're not meant to understand, things that belong to the shadows and the rivers and the deep, quiet woods where the world is still wild. All I know is that after hearing those stories and seeing the look on my father's face as he listened to those men on TV, I believe that there are some mysteries that will always haunt us. Some sounds that echo across the years and refuse to fade away. I still think about that whistling, about the fear that drove grown men to leave their boats and run from the river in the middle of the night. And I wonder how many others have heard it too, and how many will never tell their stories because they're too afraid. No one will believe them. But I believe my parents. And I believe there are things in this world that we may never truly understand, things that wait in the darkness, just out of sight, watching, listening, and sometimes letting us know they're there in ways we can't ignore. That's what makes the world both beautiful and frightening. And that's what makes stories like this one stick with you, year after year, generation after generation. It was the day of my sister's wedding, and it was honestly one of the most beautiful days I can remember. She wanted the ceremony outdoors by the river where we'd spent so much time playing as kids. That place had always been special to us, full of memories of sunny afternoons, laughter, and adventure. My sister's Wiccan, so there were plenty of charms, totems, and wards strung up around the wedding site. Some people gave them odd looks, but to her, and to most of us who knew her, they felt perfectly at home there. I've always believed that those little magical things are the reason nothing worse happened that day, and why the Mothman didn't bother the wedding party directly. The wedding itself started out amazing. All my cousins came, and it felt like a proper family reunion. Everyone was smiling, the air was warm, and someone had set up a table for beer pong, because that's just the kind of family tradition we have. The sound of laughter and clinking bottles filled the air as people took their turns and joked around. Even my grandmother tried to toss a ping pong ball, and though she missed by a mile, everyone cheered like she'd won the championship. After a while, we all took our seats, waiting for the ceremony to begin. My father looked proud as he walked my sister down the aisle. The sunlight glinted through the trees, and everything just felt right. But then, the atmosphere changed in an instant. My sister had just reached her soon-to-be husband when she suddenly screamed. It was a scream that cut through everything, so sharp and raw that the music and the laughter just stopped. She was pointing toward the river. Everyone turned, and we saw it. The river that usually ran a clear, gentle blue was instead rushing past in a deep, horrible red. It honestly looked like blood, thick and swirling in the current. Now, I should mention that the river's color sometimes changed because it was downstream from a chemical plant. Usually it would turn odd colors, sometimes blue, sometimes a weird milky white. But this was nothing like we'd ever seen before. It was as if the river itself had turned into a giant wound. There was confusion and panic. Some of the older folks gasped and covered their mouths, and a couple of the kids started crying. My mother tried to comfort my sister half, but everyone was shaken. That's when a few of the guys, including myself, decided to see what was going on. Some of the boys grabbed whatever they could use as weapons from around the wedding site. Sticks, heavy branches, even a couple of kitchen knives from the catering tables. But I felt strangely calm. Maybe it was my years of martial arts training, or maybe it was adrenaline, but I didn't feel the need to grab anything. I just clenched my fists and told myself I'd be ready if something came at us. We followed the river, moving along its edge. As we walked, the color of the water only got darker and thicker, as if whatever was causing it was somewhere further upstream. Some of the younger guys lost their nerve and turned back, but I kept going, joined only by my two uncles, both experienced hunters who didn't scare easily. The three of us pressed on, the sounds of the wedding fading behind us until the only thing we could hear was the river rushing and the crunch of our shoes on the muddy ground. Eventually, we came to a clearing where the trees opened up and we stopped dead in our tracks. There, caught on a jagged rock in the middle of the river, was the body of a man. His clothes were torn and stained with blood, and his arms and legs were twisted at odd angles. It was obvious he'd been mauled by something strong and vicious. The sight made my stomach turn, and for a moment, none of us could speak. My uncles scanned the area, trying to figure out what had happened. They found a set of prints leading away from the river and into the forest. Both of them crouched down, looking for any clue as to what kind of animal it might have been. But after a few minutes, they both stood up, shaking their heads. The tracks didn't match anything they'd ever seen. Not a bear, not a big cat, not even a wolf. They looked at each other, uneasy. One uncle said this was a job for the park ranger, that we should go back, warn everyone, and leave the professionals to handle it. But I couldn't walk away. Maybe it's just the way I am, but I can't stand it when something bad happens, and no one does anything about it. I kept thinking about my sister, how she'd been so happy just a little while ago, and how I'd promised myself nothing would ruin her special day. I felt a burning need to do something, to face whatever was out there and make sure it didn't hurt anyone else. So I told my uncles I was going into the woods, and before they could stop me, I set off, following the strange tracks. I moved carefully, every sense alert. The trees grew thicker, the shadows deeper, and the air felt heavy, almost electric, like just before a thunderstorm. I heard strange noises all around, branches snapping, leaves rustling, and something that sounded almost like whispering. My heart pounded, but I kept going. Then I saw it. Standing between the trees, half in shadow, half in light, was the creature. I didn't know anything about cryptids back then. Didn't even know the name Mothman. All I saw was something that was both hideous and, in a strange way, beautiful. It was tall, with huge wings folded behind its back. Its eyes glowed red, and its body was covered in dark, slick feathers or fur. I couldn't really tell which. There was something about its presence, something that felt almost intelligent, even noble, but at the same time I could tell it was dangerous. It watched me for a moment, its head tilting to one side, as if studying me. Then, suddenly, it let out a screech so loud and piercing that I thought my ears would bleed. I barely managed to jam my fingers in my ears before the sound hit me full force. The creature flapped its wings, sending a rush of air toward me, but I ducked just in time. For a second, I saw an opening. Maybe it was stupid, but I charged forward and threw a punch, aiming for its chest. I didn't know if I hurt it, but the creature staggered back, then pulled away. It stared at me, not with anger, but with something like respect. I realized that, even with all my training, I probably couldn't win if it decided to attack me for real. It seemed to know that too. After a few tense seconds, it turned and melted away into the woods, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. I stood there, heart pounding, hands shaking, trying to process what had just happened. I hadn't beaten it, but I hadn't run away either. And for whatever reason, it left me alone. Maybe it respected the fact that I stood up to it. Or maybe it just didn't see me as a threat. Either way, I was grateful. I made my way back to the clearing, where my uncles were waiting anxiously. When I told them what happened, they just stared at me, not sure whether to believe me or not. But I could see the fear in their eyes, and I think they knew I was telling the truth. We hurried back to the wedding party and helped everyone gather their things. We told them we had to move, that it wasn't safe by the river anymore. No one argued. We packed up as fast as we could and relocated the whole group to a nearby park, far away from the river and whatever was lurking in those woods. My sister's wedding went on, a little more subdued but still filled with love and laughter. She thanked me later for being brave, for making sure everyone was safe, but I never told her exactly what I'd seen. Some things are better left unsaid. Even now, I never go back to that river. Whenever I think about it, I remember the creature's eyes and the feeling of being watched. I wonder sometimes if it's still out there, waiting for someone else to cross its path. I hope, whoever that person is, they have the courage to stand their ground and the luck to walk away unharmed. I still believe the wards and totems my sister placed around the wedding site are the only reason the Mothman didn't attack us all directly. Maybe magic is real in its own way, or maybe we were just lucky. But I pity the next person who finds themselves face to face with something so strange and powerful. I hope they're ready for it, because not everyone gets the chance to walk away. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. A few years back, I worked a small-time maintenance job at the local park. It wasn't a big, famous place like Yellowstone, but it was my childhood park, the same one I grew up exploring. When I was a kid, I'd hike the hills, get lost in the woods, and spend hours under the old trees. So when the chance came to work there, I took the job right away, even though it didn't pay much. It felt a way to give something back to a place that had meant so much to me growing up. I spent a lot of time alone in that park, walking with a shovel over my shoulder, or hauling a saw for trail maintenance. Some days were long and lonely, but I liked the quiet. Over time, I heard plenty of strange stories from coworkers, from tales about old campers to weird things people found in the woods. But the story that stuck with me most wasn't one of my own. It belonged to a coworker named Mikhail, though everyone called him the Count. The Count had this nickname because he looked a bit like a vampire from an old movie, with his sharp features and thick black hair. But in reality, he was one of the kindest men I ever met. He must have been about 50 when I knew him, but he still had a strong build and a gentle manner. He'd help you with anything, carry tools, clean up after a job, or just stand and talk if you needed a break. Mikhail was from Poland, and he loved telling stories about his home. He'd talk for hours about his adventures in the forests back in Poland, about the strange traditions and old superstitions his family believed in. Sometimes the stories were funny, sometimes they were a little sad, but there was always something magical about the way he told them. I think it was his way of staying connected to the life he'd left behind. He and I would often work late, and sometimes when the rest of the crew was gone, we'd stay behind in the maintenance garage, sipping old coffee and swapping stories while the night grew dark outside. One evening, I could tell something was on his mind. He seemed quieter than usual, his eyes looking far away, as if remembering something he wasn't sure he wanted to share. After a while, he sighed and started telling me about his last job in Poland before he moved to the United States. He explained that in the mid-90s, after a tragedy in his life, the death of his girlfriend and the stillbirth of his child, he needed to escape. He left the city and went to live in a rural village deep in the Polish forests, taking a job as a forester with a small lumber company. The village was tiny, barely 200 people. Mikhail said it was surrounded by thick forest, and that living there was both peaceful and isolating. The logging crew was tight-knit, sharing a small, cold house with a strict manager. Despite the long days and rough living, Mikhail felt calm in the woods. He spent most of his nights walking the forest trails, seeking some sort of peace in the quiet and solitude, far from the pain that haunted him in the city. He talked about finding old structures and strange ruins in the forest, but he said he never saw anything like what he discovered one night, which turned out to be the last story he would ever share with me. It was autumn, and the air was crisp. He was walking his usual path, but that night, around 2 in the morning, he felt drawn off the beaten trail into a part of the woods he had never explored before. After moving through thick brush and low branches, he found himself standing in a clearing beneath the moonlight. There, right in the center of the clearing, stood a large, rusted structure. At first, Mikhail thought it was some kind of water tower or silo, but as he got closer, he saw it was actually a huge cage with thick metal bars welded together and a flat concrete base. The whole thing looked ancient, slowly falling apart. The bars were broken in some places, and the concrete was cracked, covered in strange stains and littered with debris, crates, cans, and other objects that looked like they had been left there a long time. As Mikhail stepped closer, a foul smell filled the air, a mix of rotting animal and vegetables, so strong it made his eyes water. When he stepped up onto the concrete, he saw that the floor inside was stained with dark reddish-brown spots. Big black feathers were scattered around, and everything looked undisturbed, as if whatever had been there hadn't been gone for long. He picked his way carefully through the mess, his flashlight in hand. Suddenly, he kicked a small oil can, and the sound echoed so loudly in the empty cage that it made him jump. He looked around, but didn't see anyone. For a moment, everything was still, and he told himself to calm down. That was when he looked up and froze. High above him, perched on a crossbar near the top of the cage, was a creature unlike anything Mikhail had ever seen. It was huge, easily the size of a person, with sleek black feathers covering its body. But the thing that made Mikhail's blood run cold was its face. It had a human face, pale and smooth, with eyes that seemed far too knowing. The creature stared down at Mikhail, then slowly opened its mouth, wider and wider, until its jaw looked like it might break. From deep inside, it let out a loud, shrill cry, a bird's call that echoed through the clearing and into the trees. Terrified, Mikhail turned and ran. He stumbled off the concrete, crashing through the undergrowth, branches whipping at his face and legs. As he ran, he heard the sound of enormous wings beating above him, following him through the darkness. Every time he looked up, he caught a glimpse of the shadowy shape flying just over the treetops. He sprinted back toward the logging camp, his heart pounding in his chest. But as he broke through the trees and into the clearing near the cabins, he felt dizzy, his legs heavy. The world spun around him, and he knew he was about to faint. Before everything went black, he saw his manager rushing out of the main building, rifle in hand, pointing it in Mikhail's direction and firing. That was the last thing Mikhail remembered. When he woke up, it was daylight. He was in his bunk, alone in the cold room. His co-workers were nowhere to be seen. At first, he thought maybe he'd dreamed the whole thing, but when he got up, he found a note on his dresser. It was from his manager. The note said, "I know what you've seen. It's come near before, and I have kept it at bay until last night. For your safety, you are no longer under our employment. Please pack your things and leave. Never speak of what you saw last night, or I will find you. Forget it ever happened." Reading that, Mikhail felt a new kind of fear. He packed his things that same day. The people in the village stared at him as he left, and no one said goodbye. He went back home, and not long after, moved to America. As he finished telling me the story, Mikhail's voice began to shake. He looked down at the floor, tears in his eyes. He seemed almost afraid to say what he truly believed, but after a while he whispered, "I know what I saw that night. It's called a Latawiek, a demon of sorts." His hands trembled as he spoke. "They say the Latawiek are the spirits of lost children, of the recently deceased. The demons they are souls that never found peace." He stopped then, unable to go on. I tried to comfort him, told him he didn't have to finish the story if it hurt too much. He wiped his eyes and thanked me for listening, picked up his coat and toolbox, and left the garage. That was the last time I ever spoke to Mikhail, the Count. But the thing that really haunts me about the story isn't just what Mikhail saw that night, or even the strange, threatening note from his manager. It's what I learned later, after I went home and tried to research the Latawiek. The legends said that these creatures are lost souls, especially of children who died before their time. Thinking about everything Mikhail had been through, the tragedy of losing his girlfriend and his unborn child, it shook me to my core to think that maybe in that dark forest, the Count had come face to face with something more than just an old legend. Maybe, in some way, he saw the restless spirit of someone he loved. After Mikhail left, I never saw him again, but I often think about his stories and the pain that seemed to follow him. Every time I walk through the park, I remember his words, his quiet way of telling a story, and the sadness in his eyes that last night in the garage. Even though I never saw anything like the Lawiak myself, I'll never forget Mikhail and the lesson he left behind, that some places and some people hold secrets too heavy to share. About 2 years ago, I experienced something that I'll never be able to forget. It happened at my girlfriend's house, a place I'd always thought was peaceful. Her house is on the very edge of her city in Mexico. There aren't any neighbors nearby, just houses separated by hundreds of yards, all surrounded by thick woods. Most days and nights out there are calm, with the gentle sounds of the forest and the occasional car passing by. I always thought it was the perfect spot to spend time outdoors, away from the noise of the city. But after what happened, I can't think of that place the same way anymore. I honestly don't think I've ever been so scared in my life. It was a chilly night in December. I had planned to stay over at my girlfriend's house because her mom was out of town, and she didn't want to spend the night alone. We'd been looking forward to this, talking about it for days. That evening, we sat together in the kitchen having dinner around 8 o'clock. We talked about what we wanted to do the next day, about chores her mom wanted her to finish, and just about how much we missed each other. We laughed a lot, enjoying the quiet comfort of being together. After we finished eating, we got up to clean the dishes. She headed off to her bedroom for a moment, and I went outside to use the bathroom. Her house was built with a long corridor connecting all the rooms, and at the very end, a back door led straight out to the patio. The patio was big and open, filled with trees and thick plants. The only thing separating it from the wild woods was a stone and barbed wire fence about 1 meter high. The bathroom was halfway down the patio, only lit by a single weak light bulb that barely cut through the dark. Anyone who needed to use the bathroom after dark had to go outside, even if it meant walking through the pitch black, only steps away from the forest. As I stepped outside, about 2 years ago, I experienced something that I'll never be able to forget. It happened at my girlfriend's house, a place I'd always thought was peaceful. Her house is on the very edge of her city in Mexico. There aren't any neighbors nearby, just houses separated by hundreds of yards, all surrounded by thick woods. Most days and nights out there are calm, with the gentle sounds of the forest and the occasional car passing by. I always thought it was the perfect spot to spend time outdoors, away from the noise of the city. But after what happened, I can't think of that place the same way anymore. I honestly don't think I've ever been so scared in my life. It was a chilly night in December. I had planned to stay over at my girlfriend's house because her mom was out of town and she didn't want to spend the night alone. We'd been looking forward to this, talking about it for days. That evening, we sat together in the kitchen having dinner around 8 o'clock. We talked about what we wanted to do the next day, about chores her mom wanted her to finish, and just about how much we missed each other. We laughed a lot, enjoying the quiet comfort of being together. After we finished eating, we got up to clean the dishes. She headed off to her bedroom for a moment, and I went outside to use the bathroom. Her house was built with a long corridor connecting all the rooms, and at the very end, a back door led straight out to the patio. The patio was big and open, filled with trees and thick plants. The only thing separating it from the wild woods was a stone and barbed wire fence about 1 meter high. The bathroom was halfway down the patio, only lit by a single weak light bulb that barely cut through the dark. Anyone who needed to use the bathroom after dark had to go outside, even if it meant walking through the pitch black, only steps away from the forest. As I stepped outside, a cold breeze brushed against my face, sending a shiver down my spine. I remember thinking to myself that I definitely didn't want to be out here at night. I hurried through my business and started back toward the house, careful not to trip on anything in the dim light. I was about halfway across the patio when I heard a sharp crack to my left, the sound of a branch snapping underfoot. I stopped immediately, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. I spun around, trying to see what had made the noise, but all I could see was part of the fence and a wall of darkness beyond it. I felt the strangest sensation, as if someone or something was watching me from the other side. I stood frozen, listening. The only sound I heard was my own breathing and the quiet, but then I noticed the crickets had gone silent. When I'd first come out, they'd been chirping. Now, everything was still. The silence made me feel even more nervous. I didn't want to stand there any longer, so I hurried back inside, almost running the last few steps. When I got back to the warmth of the house, I found my girlfriend lying on the living room couch, wrapped in a blanket, waiting for me. She noticed I seemed tense and asked if I was all right. I tried to joke it off, saying her patio was scary at night. She doesn't like scary stories or anything related to horror, so I kept what I'd just felt to myself. I sat at the other end of the couch, pulled her legs into my lap, and asked her what she was watching on TV. That was when I realized there was a huge window on the wall beside me. At first, I hadn't noticed it, since a cabinet partly blocked the view when I'd walked into the room. Now, sitting there, I could see straight out into the patio. The darkness outside looked even deeper from the couch, and I couldn't help glancing over every now and then, my mind still uneasy. We watched TV for a while, and I took off her socks and started rubbing her feet under the blanket. It was a cold night, and her feet were freezing. The documentary on TV was boring, and soon the room got quiet. I started feeling sleepy, my eyelids growing heavy, but then I heard another noise outside. Soft, almost hidden, but definitely real. It sounded like twigs snapping and grass being brushed aside. I grabbed the remote and muted the TV, straining to listen. The sound was faint but clear, coming from the patio. I turned to look outside the window, but all I could see was the outline of the plants and part of the thick trunk of a tree. The noises outside stopped for a few moments, then started again. I sat perfectly still, staring out the window, waiting for something to appear. I whispered to my girlfriend, asking if she heard it, but when I turned, I saw she had fallen asleep, her eyes closed and her breathing slow. Now I was alone, wide awake, and suddenly aware of every creak and crack in the house. I tried to convince myself it was just a coyote or some other animal from the woods. The noises finally faded, and I tried to focus on the TV again, but curiosity kept pulling my eyes back to the window. Then, in one of those glances, my heart dropped into my stomach. In the weak light, I saw a tall gray figure peeking from behind the big tree trunk, staring right at me. For a second, I thought maybe it was just my imagination or a trick of the shadows. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw it more clearly. A pale, thin humanoid figure, so thin that I could see the outline of its long neck and bony shoulders. It must have been at least 6 or 7 feet tall. The way its skin shone against the darkness made it look even more unnatural. I couldn't see its eyes, but I could sense that it was looking straight at me. My whole body froze. I didn't want to move or even breathe. I knew I needed to wake up my girlfriend, but I was too scared to break eye contact with the creature outside. I kept watching it, hoping it would just turn and leave, but it stood completely still, as if it was waiting for me to move first. Then it started making clicking sounds. Slow, echoing, almost like the croak of a frog, but deeper and more hollow. The thing tilted its head to the side and then snapped it back to look at me, repeating this strange motion several times. My fear grew with each second. I tried to whisper my girlfriend's name, barely moving my lips, but she didn't wake up. Minutes passed like hours. I remembered I still had her foot in my hand under the blanket, so without moving the rest of my body, I started to gently pull and push her foot, hoping she would wake up. She didn't move, and the creature just kept watching. Then, slowly, it crouched down like a cat ready to pounce, never breaking its stare. I whispered again, begging her to wake up, but she stayed asleep. Finally, after what felt like forever, the thing straightened up and stepped backward into the darkness, making those eerie clicking noises again. I blinked and realized my eyes were dry from staring so hard. I didn't know if I could move yet, But after a few minutes of silence, I slowly turned to my girlfriend and started calling her name more loudly. I pushed her leg, rubbed her foot, and finally, she jerked awake. She looked at me with confusion, her eyes adjusting to the light. I leaned over her and whispered urgently for her to stay still and quiet. She saw the panic in my eyes and became frightened herself, even though she didn't know what was happening. Then the clicking sound came again, this time much louder, as if whatever had been in the yard was now right outside the window. We both heard it and stared at each other in complete silence, too afraid to speak. My girlfriend asked what the sound was, her voice shaking, but I just pressed my finger to my lips, begging her to be quiet. Very slowly, I turned my head back to the window, and there it was. The creature was standing right on the other side of the glass, barely 2 feet away, staring at us. This time, in the glow from the window, I saw it more clearly, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Its eyes were oval-shaped and dark as midnight, and its skin was so pale it looked almost gray. But the worst part was its mouth. Or rather, the place where its mouth should have been. Instead of having a mouth on its face, it had a horizontal slit on its neck, which opened and closed with the clicking sounds, showing rows of tiny, razor-sharp teeth that shined in the light. It looked like it was grinning at us. I was shaking, barely able to breathe, and I could feel my girlfriend's body tense up as she looked too. She tried to ask what it was, her voice barely a whisper, but I had no words. We just sat there, frozen in fear, unable to look away. The creature noticed my girlfriend moving and stepped closer, lowering its head as if it was examining us. We both flinched, thinking it was about to come crashing through the window. Instead, the thing began to walk slowly along the outside of the house, its head still turned toward us as it made its way toward the door at the end of the corridor. The clicking noises grew louder, echoing off the walls. The way it moved, slow and smooth, reminded me of the scene from the movie Signs, when the alien steps out of the bushes. We could see every part of its strange, thin body as it passed by the window. Once it disappeared from view, we sat up and looked at each other, our faces pale and terrified. Suddenly, we heard a scratching noise at the metal door leading into the corridor, long, slow scrapes like claws dragging across the metal. Without thinking, I grabbed my girlfriend's wrist and pulled her up. We ran out of the living room and into her bedroom, locking the door behind us. We sat on the floor right beside the bed, hiding and barely breathing, listening to the scratching sounds and praying it wouldn't get inside. My girlfriend started crying softly, asking over and over what that thing was, but I had no answers. All I could do was hold her tight and wait for it to leave. The scratching went on for several minutes before suddenly stopping. Then we heard footsteps, slow and heavy, moving around the house. We listened in complete silence, too scared to move, turning our heads every time the sound came from a different part of the house. After a while, the noises faded away, and eventually, it was quiet again. We waited another hour, barely daring to breathe, before deciding it was safe to move. My girlfriend asked if we could lie down in bed, and I agreed. My back was aching from sitting on the floor so long, and I hoped that lying down would help calm us both. We crawled into bed and pulled the covers over us, holding each other tight. I whispered to her that everything would be okay, that tomorrow would be better, and told her to try to sleep. She didn't answer, but eventually, her breathing slowed and she drifted off. I didn't sleep at all. I kept my eyes open the entire night, listening to every sound in the house, convinced that thing might come back. The next morning, neither of us wanted to talk about what had happened. We agreed that whatever we saw was not from this world. My girlfriend said she couldn't get the feeling of its stare out of her mind, that it felt like it was seeing into her soul. After that, we avoided talking about it, but it left us both shaken and nervous, especially at night. In the days that followed, both of us suffered from nightmares. My girlfriend would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming and trembling, until her mom came to check on her. Her family rebuilt the fence around the patio, making it much taller and stronger, trying to keep anything from coming in from the woods. Even now, she gets chills whenever she has to go outside after dark. We haven't seen that creature again, but neither of us will ever forget the night we came face to face with something truly terrifying. Now, whenever I visit her house, I always make sure to stay inside after dark, and I never go near that patio at night. I don't remember exactly where we were, but I'm pretty sure my family and I were on vacation. To keep their privacy, I'll change everyone's names, not that they even know about what happened that day. There was my brother, Chris, and my cousin Harry. Mom is just Mom. We'd just checked into a 2-bedroom hotel room, and right away, Chris and Harry started arguing over who would get to sleep on the fold-out bed in the couch. There were 2 big, comfortable hotel beds, but for some reason, both of them wanted the flimsy fold-out. That's how guys are sometimes, always picking the weirdest things to fight about. I glanced at my mom, who was already looking a bit tired from the long drive. I told her I wanted to go outside and check out the woods nearby. She gave me her usual worried look and asked if my phone still had enough battery. I checked and saw it was above 50%. I nodded and promised to be careful. She just told me not to be gone too long. I gave her a quick hug and headed out. The sun was setting, and the sky was painted with orange and pink streaks. The woods near the hotel looked peaceful, a mix of bare trees and evergreens, and I thought it would be a good time to practice some photography. I snapped a picture of the sunset through the trees, feeling the cool air on my face. Everything seemed perfectly normal. As I wandered further in, I suddenly heard a howl echo through the trees. It was the kind of howl that makes the hair on your arms stand up, sharp and wild. I remembered reading that coyotes and sometimes wolves are found in parts of Texas, but I never expected them to come this close to where people stayed. Trying to be cautious, I found a sturdy stick and kept it with me as a makeshift weapon, just in case. I kept walking, curiosity leading me deeper into the woods. That's when I spotted the outline of an old structure not too far away. It looked like an abandoned barn, dusty and worn out, half hidden behind some scraggly trees. If I'd been smarter, I would have remembered that old barns in the woods aren't always the safest places. But I was 16 and more curious than careful. The barn's main door was wide open, creaking slightly with the wind. I stepped closer, feeling a chill run down my spine. Suddenly, another howl echoed through the air, even louder than before, and it sounded like it was coming from inside the barn. I spun around, ready with my stick, expecting a pack of wild dogs to leap out at me. But there was nothing behind me. The only place that howl could have come from was right there in the barn. At that moment, I should have turned around and walked straight back to the hotel, but something made me step into the barn instead. The air inside was strangely warm, almost like I'd walked into a different season. My breath didn't fog up like it did outside. I turned on my phone's flashlight and shined the narrow beam around. Dust motes floated in the air, and the smell was thick, old hay, rust, and something I couldn't quite place. I took a few steps further in, sweeping my light from side to side, looking for whatever animal was hiding inside. Suddenly, the beam caught a pair of eyes glowing in the dark. They reflected the light back at me, and for a split second I froze. I realized I wasn't just looking at an animal, I was staring at something I didn't even have words for. The creature was huge, almost 8.5 feet tall, hunched over but still towering above me. Its fur was a deep, dirty crimson, and it covered thick arms and legs that looked like a strange mix of human limbs and wolf paws. It had a long, bushy tail, and its hands and feet had sharp claws that clicked softly against the old barn floor. Its head was that of a giant canine, with pointed ears and a long snout. I could see rows of teeth lining its jaw, each one jagged and strong enough to bite through metal. Its body looked powerful, packed with muscles under that matted fur, like it could snap me in half with a single swipe. But the worst part was its eyes, 2 burning red lights staring into me. They didn't just look at me, they looked through me, as if the creature could see everything I was feeling in that moment. I wanted to run, but my feet felt stuck to the ground. My heart was pounding so loudly in my chest, I thought the creature could probably hear it. I kept staring at it, unable to move, my hands shaking so much I almost dropped my phone. The creature was hunched over something, and as I looked closer, I realized it was what remained of an animal, maybe a deer or a wild hog. The creature's jaws were stained with blood, but it didn't seem bothered by my presence. In fact, it almost looked like it was waiting for me. Then, in the heavy silence, the creature spoke. Its voice was low and rough, almost like gravel scraping against metal. "You look cold," it said. For a moment, I thought I was imagining things. But then it spoke again, its voice echoing in the warm barn air. "Come here. I'll keep you warm." It smiled at me, a wide, toothy grin that was meant to look friendly, but only made it more terrifying. That was all I needed. My body finally remembered how to move, and I turned and bolted for the door, sprinting as fast as I could. My legs pumped harder than they ever had before, adrenaline burning in my veins. As I ran, I made the mistake of glancing back. The last thing I saw was the wolf-like creature's face, smiling, its jaws open as if it was just about to lunge after me. I didn't stop running until I was out of the woods, back in the bright lights of the hotel parking lot. I raced through the main door, breathless and sweaty, and went straight to the nearest bathroom. I locked myself inside and sat on the closed toilet, trying to calm myself down. My heart was still pounding so fast I thought I might faint. For a while, I just sat there, trying to convince myself I was safe. That's when my phone buzzed with a message from Mom. She asked if I was all right, and I quickly texted back, telling her I was fine, that I was back at the hotel and just in the bathroom. After a few more minutes, I finally worked up the courage to leave the bathroom and go back to the hotel room. Chris and Harry were still arguing over the fold-out bed, and Mom was busy unpacking, completely unaware of what had just happened to me. I crawled into one of the regular beds and pulled the covers up to my chin. I was way too scared to fall asleep, my mind replaying the whole thing over and over again. I thought maybe music would help, so I searched my hoodie, jeans, backpack, and even my pajama pockets for my earbuds, but they were nowhere to be found. That's when I realized I must have dropped them while running away from the barn. The creature could keep them for all I cared. I wasn't about to go back there to get them, and by noon tomorrow, I hoped I'd be far enough away that nothing from those woods could ever follow me. As I lay there in the hotel bed, every creak and whisper of wind made me flinch. I kept thinking about that creature, how it seemed to fill the entire barn with heat, how its voice was almost mocking, and how its eyes burned into me. I didn't know what it was, why it was there, or why it wanted me to come closer. Maybe it was just hungry. Maybe it was something even worse. All I knew was, I never wanted to see it again. I hope, wherever it is, it stays far away from me and my family. And from now on, whenever I go on vacation, I'll think twice before wandering into the woods alone, especially if there's an old barn nearby. When I was 17, I went on a horseback riding trip with my father and some of his friends. We were riding the trails in a place called East Fork, which is a hilly area filled with thick woods and tall cliffs. The views were beautiful, the kind of scenery that takes your breath away, especially when you're out riding a horse and the sun is just right. Every now and then, we would come across a small camp area or a stable where riders could stop to rest their horses for the night. We started riding around 10 in the morning, and we didn't stop until nearly 7 in the evening. It was a long day, but the ride was peaceful for the most part. We met other riders along the way, and even stopped for lunch with one group whose path kept crossing ours. The group we had lunch with seemed like a nice family, and we all chatted for a while before continuing down different trails. Later in the afternoon, though, things got a little tense between me and my dad. He kept nagging me about being on my phone while we rode, and eventually, it turned into a real argument. I guess he was annoyed that I wasn't soaking in the nature around me, but I just needed to check messages every now and then. After the argument, my dad complained about it to his friends, and he brought it up more than once, making the rest of the ride awkward for both of us. Finally, when we stopped to make camp, I decided I'd had enough. I confronted him about it, telling him he didn't have to keep going on and on about my phone use in front of his friends. We ended up shouting at each other. After a while, I just lost it. I yelled something about how stubborn he was and stormed off into the woods, wanting to get away and cool down. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed some space to breathe and calm my mind. I wandered around for about 30 minutes, pushing through the underbrush and listening to my footsteps crunch on fallen leaves. The forest was getting dark and a little cold, but it felt good to be alone for a while. Eventually, as I was walking, I saw the light of another camp up ahead. As I got closer, I realized it was the same family we'd had lunch with earlier that day. There was a fire burning, and they were all sitting around it, talking and laughing. One of the men, Tom, saw me first and waved. He greeted me cheerfully, asking where my group was. I explained I was just taking a walk to get away from my dad for a bit. He laughed and said he understood. Tom then invited me to join their family for dinner and promised he'd walk me back to my camp after we ate. My stomach rumbled, making the decision for me. I accepted and joined them around the fire. Tom introduced me to everyone. His brother Keith was there, along with Tom's wife, Kathleen, and their 3 kids. Jordan, who was about my age, and the twins, Molly and Brian, who were much younger. I remembered meeting them briefly at lunch, but hadn't learned their names until now. Everyone was warm and friendly, and I quickly felt at home with them. Kathleen started setting out plates on a folding card table while the rest of us chatted. When dinner was ready, Keith called everyone over. We ate together, talking and laughing as the sky grew darker and the woods around us filled with the sounds of night. Jordan and I talked about school and music, while Tom played a few chords on an old guitar after he finished eating. The twins grew tired, so Kathleen took them into the camper to tuck them into bed. It was getting late, and Tom stood up, offering to walk me back to my camp, just like he had promised. I agreed, realizing it was probably time to head back. Jordan stood up as well, maybe to say goodbye, but then she suddenly froze in place. I saw her face go pale, her eyes wide with silent fear. She was staring past us toward the edge of the camper. Tom and I both turned around to see what had scared her so badly. At first, I thought it was a trick of the shadows, but then I saw it too. There, not far from the camper, stood a tall, lean, horrifying creature. It was at least 9 feet tall, and that wasn't even counting the huge rack of antlers rising from its skull. Its body was both muscular and thin at the same time, twisted in a way that didn't seem possible for any normal animal. Its head looked like a deer's skull, but pieces of skin still clung to the bone, making it even more disturbing. Its arms were long, ending in sharp claws, and in one of its hands, it clutched something that looked like a human arm. My mind couldn't make sense of it. Tom cursed loudly, and that finally broke the silence. Jordan let out a scream, and I stood frozen, unable to move or even breathe. It was like staring at a living nightmare. The noise brought Kathleen running out of the camper. She was holding a shotgun, and without even hesitating, she fired at the creature. One shot, then another, then a third. The creature screamed, a shriek so loud and horrible it made my ears ring. It turned and ran off into the woods, crashing through the trees and howling that terrible sound the whole way. After it was gone, Tom wasted no time. He ordered everyone into the camper, locking the door behind us. He started calling out for his brother, Keith, who still hadn't come back after going behind the camper. There was no answer. Tom's face was white with fear, but he grabbed a flashlight and handed me another one, asking if I'd help him look for Keith. He told me to stay close to the camper. We didn't have to look far. Just 10 feet into the trees, we found Keith's body. His pants were still undone, as if he'd been caught off guard, and there were bites taken out of his face and stomach. The sight was so gruesome I had to look away, my stomach churning. Meanwhile, Kathleen had already called the park rangers, and within 20 minutes they arrived with 2 police officers. They took statements from all of us, examining Keith's body while we waited in shock. When they questioned me, I tried to tell them what we'd seen, but I could tell by the looks on their faces they didn't believe it. After all the interviews, I overheard one of the officers calling my dad to explain where I was and what had happened. I heard him tell my dad that I had witnessed a bear attack. I was stunned. Did they even look at the body? Did they listen to what we said? There was no way a bear could have done what we'd seen. But the police seemed to want an easy answer. My dad showed up soon after. He looked worried, but when he saw I was okay, he hugged me and asked if I was all right. I nodded, still in shock, and turned to say goodbye to Tom, Kathleen, and their kids. They looked as lost and confused as I felt. No one had any answers, only fear and grief for what they'd just gone through. The rest of that night was a blur. My dad took me back to our camp. He asked me questions, but I could barely speak. I spent the night replaying everything I'd seen in my head, the creature's face haunting my dreams. Even now, years later, I remember the look on Tom's face when he realized his brother was gone, the sound of Kathleen firing the shotgun, and the nightmare that appeared out of the darkness. After that, I never saw the family again, but I never forgot what happened. Some things out there in the woods can't be explained, and sometimes, even when you tell the truth, nobody wants to listen. I live in Johannesburg, South Africa, but my whole family comes from Zimbabwe. Once in a while, I make the long trip up north to visit my uncle, aunt, and cousin. Every time I visit, we all head out together to a place called Mana Pools. If you've never heard of it, Mana Pools is one of those rare wild places left in the world, the kind where the wildlife roams freely, without fences, and anything can happen. You can see elephants wandering right past your camp, and sometimes lions come so close at night you can hear their heavy breathing just outside your tent. It's the sort of place where nature is always close, sometimes a little too close for comfort. Just the other day, and this is 2018, a kudu, a kind of deer native to Africa, was killed right in the restaurant area by a pack of wild dogs. That's how wild Mana Pools is. It's not like a zoo or a tame game reserve. Here you're living among the animals, and you never know what you might see or what might happen next. My cousin and I have always thought of ourselves as pretty tough. We're not the kind of people who get scared easily, not even by the wild lions or hyenas that sometimes prowl through our camp at night. We grew up in the bush, and we're used to the sounds of the African night, the rustle of leaves as something moves in the darkness, the distant roar of a lion, or the soft hoot of an owl. But on the first night of this trip, something felt different. Neither of us could sleep. We both kept lying awake, staring at the roof of the tent, feeling as if something was watching us from the darkness. It wasn't like the usual feeling you get when you know there are wild animals outside. It was deeper, stranger, like something didn't belong in the world around us. We tried to brush it off, just like we always do. We aren't superstitious, and we don't believe in the paranormal. We just told each other that it was nothing, that maybe we were just spooked from the long drive, or maybe there was a hyena nearby making us feel jumpy. But the feeling didn't go away. It just lingered in the back of our minds, even when the sun came up. Despite the strange feeling, we spent our days like we always do. We fished in the river, went on long game drives, and walked through the bush looking for wildlife. My cousin has 2 sons, and he used this trip as a chance to teach them about tying knots, tracking animals, and surviving in the thick African bush. We showed them how to look for prints in the dirt, how to move quietly so you don't scare the animals, and how to tell the difference between a lion track and a hyena track. Those were good days, simple, filled with the kind of peace you only find when you're far away from the city. One day, while we were out walking without the kids, we came across something strange. At first, we thought it was the remains of a lion's kill. There was a large animal lying in the grass, and the smell of blood hung heavy in the air. When we got closer, I realized it was a sable, a type of antelope. But this wasn't an ordinary sable. This was a huge animal, about 700 kilograms, almost as big as a moose. My cousin Barry looked at me and said, "Hey, let me go get the kids. They have to see this." I told him it was a good idea, and I'd stay back to make sure nothing else came around while he was gone. As I stood there alone, I started looking more closely at the kill, trying to figure out what had happened. In my mind, I started piecing together the timeline, imagining how the attack went down. But something wasn't adding up. The bite marks weren't like anything I'd ever seen before. I'd seen plenty of lion kills, but this was different. The teeth marks were bigger, deeper, and spaced farther apart. When Barry came back with my uncle and the kids, my uncle took one look at the carcass, and I could see on his face that he noticed the same thing I did. But he just shrugged and said, "Looks like a really big lion got it," even though we both knew that wasn't true. The kids were fascinated, but the adults all felt uneasy. Later, back at camp, after the kids had gone off to play, my cousin, my uncle, and I sat in the back of the truck, talking in low voices about what we'd seen. We all agreed it wasn't a lion that killed the sable. Whatever it was bigger than anything we'd seen before. We didn't want to scare the kids, but we couldn't shake the feeling that something unnatural was out there. That night, I decided I wasn't taking any chances. I set up my hammock near the campfire and made sure I had my .375 rifle and my Colt 1911 pistol close by. I wasn't about to let whatever killed that sable get anywhere near us. As I settled into the hammock, I noticed something odd. The bush was completely silent. Not a single bird or insect made a sound. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath. A chill went down my spine. I sat up in the hammock, scanning the darkness beyond the circle of firelight. I couldn't see anything, and I couldn't hear anything moving, but I knew deep down that something was out there, just beyond the reach of the light. I felt like prey, like a takeaway meal in a plastic bag, just waiting for something to come and grab me. I thought to myself, what the hell am I doing out here? This is crazy. The feeling of being watched was so strong that I finally decided to climb higher up into the trees, away from the ground and whatever might be stalking the camp. I took my rifle and my pistol and climbed up, hoping that a little extra height might keep me safe. From my perch in the tree, I kept watch over the camp for hours. The silence never broke, and the uneasy feeling stayed with me until dawn. When the sun finally rose, the sounds of the bush slowly returned. Birds singing, insects buzzing, the normal life of the African wild. But even then, I couldn't shake the memory of that strange, silent night and the feeling that something powerful and unknown was lurking just out of sight. The rest of our trip, we were all a little on edge. We stuck closer together, kept the kids within sight, and made sure the fire never went out at night. We never saw anything else strange, but none of us ever forgot what happened. Sometimes, when the night is especially quiet and the bush goes still, I find myself remembering Monopools, that silent night, and the sense that the world can hold secrets too big and too wild for us to understand. If you ever find yourself in the African wild, don't take anything for granted. Listen to your instincts, and remember, there are things out there we can't always explain, and some nights the bush grows quiet for a reason. It all began with a nightmare, though I can't really remember what the dream was about. Honestly, the details of the dream don't matter much compared to what happened next. My parents' bedroom was arranged in a square shape with 4 walk-in closets at the time. There was also a small rectangular room connected to their bedroom, what we called the cat room. We might have had an exercise bike in there, but I can't remember exactly. What I do remember is that the bed faced 3 of the closets, which were all closed, and the other closet was next to one of the windows. That night, I was sleeping between my mom and dad. My dad is a heavy sleeper and snores a lot. My mom is a pretty deep sleeper too, but not as much as my dad. I, on the other hand, have always been a light sleeper. My mom was facing the 4th closet with her back toward me, and I could feel her hair brushing against my right arm. My dad was turned toward us, but when I looked at him, his eyes were closed and he was clearly asleep. I woke up when my dad started snoring loudly. Right away I got the feeling that something was off. I felt like someone was staring at me, but when I checked, both my parents were asleep. That's when I looked into the darkness of the room. I watched the shadows for several minutes, maybe 4 or 5. There was a clock on that side of the bed, near the windows. One was large with a white curtain, the other narrow and without any covering. I rolled over, turning my back to my dad and facing my mom. That's when I saw it. At first, I wasn't sure if it was real or just my eyes playing tricks on me in the dark, but I caught a quick glimpse of something standing there. The figure was tall and almost seemed to fade away at the knees or hips, as if it was hovering just above the bed. Its arms hung at its sides, but it didn't seem to have hands, just stubs where hands should have been. Its whole body was blurry, with no hair and no clear facial features. The head was just as unclear as the rest. I ducked my head under the blanket, heart pounding. When I finally gathered the courage to look again, the figure was gone. I knew it couldn't have been the curtain, because it stood at least a foot away from the window, and the curtain was parted slightly. Besides, the shade of the figure was lighter than the curtain in the darkness, and the way it stood was wrong. It just didn't make sense. Shortly after, my mom got up. She has a habit of waking up every hour or so, and she turned on the bathroom and kitchen lights as she moved through the house. I got up too, not wanting to be left alone in the room after what I'd seen. When I followed her out, I noticed our big orange cat, Rudy, huddled and puffed up in the corner of the kitchen near the dishwasher. Rudy was the most laid-back, lazy cat we had. He almost never reacted to anything, but tonight he was on edge, angry. When my mom tried to pet him, he hissed and bit her hand before running away to hide under the table. That was strange for Rudy. He was always so sweet. Nothing else unusual happened that night, and the next day, the cats were back to normal, except Rudy, who still seemed upset and tense for no clear reason. That stuck with me. After that night, life went on, but then something else happened. Yesterday, around midnight, I was lying in my bed, on my phone, when I suddenly felt drawn to the window for no reason at all. I pulled the curtain back and, in the woods beyond our yard, I saw something faint and white. Our house is on a hill, and my bedroom is on the second floor, with one window facing the driveway and road, and another looking directly into the woods. The figure was behind a tree, as if it was hiding or didn't want to be seen. When I tried to open the curtain wider and take a picture, it quickly slipped behind the tree and disappeared. I waited, hoping it would come back, but it never did. I must have fallen asleep after that. Nothing happened the next day, but I decided I'd try to get some pictures if I saw it again. I should mention that I haven't told my parents or my sister about any of this. They're Christian and not superstitious at all. They'd probably just shrug it off if I did tell them. Also, my eyesight isn't the best anymore. I've needed glasses since about 2015 or 2016. So when I see something without my glasses, it's usually just a blurry outline. But I know what I saw was there. A couple of days passed, and I promised myself I'd post some photos of the woods for reference. Some in daylight, some edited to show where I saw the thing, and maybe even some sketches to give an idea of what it looked like. But before I could get around to that, I ended up going with my family to a fair, and then we stayed overnight at my cousin's house. My cousin, Hay, is taller than me and pretty strong. She doesn't back down from anything. My younger sister Olive is brave too. Their house is built on top of a storage area, with large windows facing the woods and fields outside. That night, we were all hanging out in the living room, me on the couch, Hay and Olive on a mattress on the floor. The only lights outside were motion-activated floodlights. It was late, around midnight, and we were talking quietly when suddenly the outside lights flicked on. Hay said the lights only came on if something big moved outside, not just a small animal. Olive said she saw something white moving around near the cars parked outside. A couple of silver cars and a big yellow moving truck. We all looked out the windows, and at first, I thought it might be one of the cats, but they were all inside. Then we saw something crouched behind the truck. Olive pointed out what looked like a black, human-shaped blob. We thought maybe it was just someone lurking around, and we started to panic a little, unsure of what to do. Then, for a split second, I caught another white flash. Maybe a second figure, or maybe the thing could change color. I was unsettled and stayed up for a while, but nothing else happened that night. After that, I started feeling more and more paranoid, having trouble thinking straight. I was determined to get those pictures, but things kept getting in the way, like our trip to South Dakota. Still, I promised to update my story if anything else happened. Later that week, we set out on a road trip through Minnesota, South Dakota, and Wyoming, ending up at Yellowstone National Park. During the days, nothing happened. But at night, in a hotel cabin in Yellowstone, something terrifying happened again. The cabin was round, with the rooms all connected, and the beds were soft and comfortable. I thought I'd sleep through the night, but around 5:11 in the morning, I woke up from a dream that wasn't even scary. I just felt strange, like someone was watching me, but I didn't feel afraid at first. As I turned over in bed, I saw the white thing again. This time, I only saw its head, and the details were even more disturbing than before. It had a single giant blue eye, icy, sunken, and just plain wrong. Worse than that, it had holes across its face, with long, thin things, maybe tongues, sticking out. The sight of it made my stomach turn. I blinked and it was gone. But I had a strong sense it had gone under the bed. When my parents started moving around the cabin, the feeling finally faded. Later that day, we went out to see some mountains and crossed a small old bridge. I stayed behind while the rest of my family went ahead. I looked up at the sky and saw a quick black flash on the ridge above us, then a white flash, both gone in an instant. It was enough to make me hurry across the bridge and stick close to my family for the rest of the day. Back home, another small but strange thing happened. I was outside petting one of our cats, a full black one named Sal. He's usually a good alert for danger. As I petted him, he suddenly seemed interested in something behind me. His tail thumped softly, then harder, and he growled. He swiped at my hand, then jumped down and circled my legs, acting normal again. I turned to look, but saw nothing. I picked him up and carried him toward the deck, but he wiggled out of my arms and darted away. As I watched him, I caught sight of something white darting behind the house. That's when I finally ran inside and locked the door. Thinking back, I realized this thing, whatever it was, seemed interested in getting closer to me. Maybe even the animals too. It never showed itself to my family, just to me. I'm not sure why or what it wanted. Maybe seeing it that first night connected us somehow, or maybe it was just curious. The cats always seemed to notice something before I did, which made me feel a little safer sticking close to them. I haven't been outside alone much since then, and I'll probably keep it that way for a while. Whatever this thing is, I hope it goes away. But I can't shake the feeling that it's still watching, waiting for another chance to appear. For now, that's everything. I know my story might sound unbelievable, but it's all true as best as I can remember it. I'll keep watching, and if anything else happens, I'll let you know. Stay safe out there, and trust your instincts. Sometimes there really is something in the dark, and sometimes it's looking right at you. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. The summer of my 12th year was supposed to be just like all the others, and for the most part, it started off that way. Every year since I could remember, my family would drive up north to a little summer home my dad and uncle owned together. The house sat just outside a small, quiet town, far enough from the city that you'd forget about concrete and car horns for a while. Behind the house, a thick, beautiful forest stretched for what felt like miles, the kind of woods you only see in old storybooks. The pines were so tall and close together that the sun could barely reach the ground in places, and the air always smelled like fresh earth and something green and wild. For me and my cousin James, those woods were our kingdom. We would wait for months, counting down the days to when we'd get to leave the hot city behind and live wild for a few weeks. My cousin and I, only a year apart, were best friends. Together, we'd built forts out of fallen branches, carved our initials into tree trunks, and made up stories about monsters and treasure hidden deep in the shadows. It was our tradition to spend at least a few nights camping outside. Just us, even though the house was always only a shout away. At night, the forest changed, and we felt like explorers discovering a world no one else had ever seen. That particular summer, though, things were different from the very beginning. My uncle got called away for work, and at first, it seemed like the whole trip would be canceled. I remember the way my stomach dropped when my parents told me. I tried everything to convince them to go anyway. I promised I'd help carry the bags, do the dishes, even go a whole week without fighting with my sister. I guess I wore them down, or maybe they could just see how much I needed this trip. In the end, my mom said we could still go, but James and his family wouldn't be there. When we finally arrived, I jumped out of the car before it had even stopped moving and took in the smell of pine and the song of birds I didn't hear back home. My parents set to unpacking, but all I could think about was setting up camp. I found my old tent, dragged it outside, and picked the flattest, softest patch of grass I could find. close enough to the house that I could see the kitchen light, but just far enough into the woods that I could pretend I was out there all alone, just like the explorers in the books I read. It took me longer than usual to get the tent up, since I had no one to help hold the poles or laugh with me when I got things tangled. Still, I was proud when I finished. As the sky started to darken, I gathered firewood like I'd seen my dad do so many times before. The quiet of the woods felt deeper without James there. But I tried to tell myself that was part of the adventure. Dinner was a simple affair, canned beans and toast over my little fire, with my mom occasionally glancing out the window to check on me. I could see her smile, reassuring and proud. After I ate, I pulled out my battered flashlight and a science fiction novel I'd been saving for the trip. As darkness fell, I burrowed into my sleeping bag, feeling the warm glow of the flashlight and the comfort of the story push away the shadows pressing against the thin walls of my tent. I must have dozed off somewhere around midnight. I remember waking up to the cool hush of the forest, the kind of silence that is somehow louder than any city noise. My watch, glowing faintly in the dark, read 4:08 a.m. For a moment I just listened. There was nothing but the soft, constant whisper of the wind in the pines and the distant call of an owl. I was about to close my eyes again when I heard a sound, something brushing against the side of my tent. So faint I thought I might have dreamed it. I lay perfectly still, my heart pounding in my chest. Another soft rustle came, closer this time. I held my breath and listened. Maybe it was a rabbit or a raccoon, I told myself. I knew the woods were full of small creatures, and I'd heard them plenty of times before. I waited, but the sound didn't come again. After a while, I rolled over and tried to sleep. That was when I heard it, a strange, low growl, nothing like the bark of a dog or the yowl of a cat. It started soft, then rose in pitch, almost like an angry cat's hiss, but deeper, raw and old-sounding. It was followed by something that sounded like a voice, harsh and hoarse, somewhere between a whisper and a moan. My blood ran cold. I gripped the flashlight in my hand and lay as still as I could, trying not to breathe too loudly. I thought about yelling for my parents, but I was frozen, terrified that any noise would draw the thing closer. The sound circled the tent, slow and deliberate, like it was trying to figure out where I was. Every so often it would scratch at the thin fabric of the tent, just lightly, as if testing it. I could hear its breathing, deep, heavy, and full of clicks and pops, as though its throat was full of thick spit. I don't know how long I stayed that way, staring into the darkness, afraid to even blink. Sometimes I could hear the thing moving away, but then it would circle back, always just out of sight, always close enough that I could feel it watching me. I clutched my sleeping bag, wishing I was safe inside the house, wishing James was there to whisper jokes or stories, anything to make it less real. Once I built up the courage to flick on my flashlight, hoping the light would scare it away. Instantly, the scratching stopped, and I felt the weight of silence pressing down on me. I turned the light off just as quickly, praying that I hadn't made things worse. Minutes felt like hours. My mouth was dry, my heart beating so hard I thought it might wake my parents. Just when I thought I might start crying, the first hint of dawn crept through the trees. The darkness faded, replaced by the soft gray light of morning. I lay perfectly still, listening. The breathing was gone. The scratching had stopped. All I could hear was the slow, steady drip of dew falling from the leaves. It took a while before I had the courage to unzip my tent and peek outside. The world looked exactly the same as it had the day before. The trees stood tall and silent, the grass was damp with dew, and the house was only a short dash away. I stumbled toward it, legs shaking, and banged on the door until my mom opened it, her face full of concern. When she saw me, pale, sweaty, and barely able to stand, she pulled me into a tight hug. My dad came running, and they sat me down in the kitchen, wrapping me in a blanket and making me drink sweet tea until I could talk again. I told them what happened, every detail, and for once, they didn't brush it off as just my imagination. My mom called the family friend who had joined us for the trip, and together they walked out to the tent. They didn't find anything unusual, no footprints, no torn fabric, no evidence of an animal, but the look on my face must have convinced them something had happened, even if it was only in my mind. For the rest of the trip, I slept inside. in the safety of the house. I couldn't bring myself to even look at the tent, let alone go back out there at night. The woods felt different now, less like a kingdom and more like a place where things watched from the shadows. It took months before I felt like myself again. I stopped talking about what happened, afraid people would laugh or call me a liar. But sometimes, late at night, I'd remember the sound of that growl, the way it shifted from animal to something almost human, the way it seemed to circle my tent, searching. I'd lie awake in my bed, listening to the creaks and sighs of the house, wondering if I'd ever really be able to go back to the woods I loved so much. Years passed, and eventually, the summer home was sold. The family who bought it sent us pictures once, showing their own children playing in the same woods, setting up tents in the same clearing. I wondered if they ever heard anything strange at night, or if the thing I encountered had moved on, searching for someone else to scare. Even now, as an adult, I sometimes dream about that night. In the dream, I'm a child again, alone in my little tent, the darkness pressing in on all sides. I hear the growl, feel the scratching, sense the presence just outside. I wake up with my heart pounding, the memory as fresh as if it happened yesterday. Looking back, I still don't know what it was. Animal, person, or something else entirely. Maybe it was just a trick of the mind, fear feeding on itself in the darkness. Or maybe, just maybe, the woods really do hold secrets, waiting for someone foolish or brave enough to sleep alone in their shadows. But no matter how many years pass, I know one thing for sure. I never went camping alone again. If you ever find yourself in the woods at night, lying awake and listening to the wind, remember my story. Sometimes the darkness hides things you can't explain, and the best thing you can do is pull your sleeping bag up over your head and wait for the dawn. But if you hear that old hoarse voice, somewhere between a growl and a whisper, don't answer. Just listen, and wait, and hope the sun comes soon. Every year, as far back as I can remember, my family went on vacation to Colorado. We made it our tradition, a kind of escape from the patterns of everyday life, where the familiar became background noise and the mountains became everything. At first, it started as a once-in-a-while trip, maybe just something my parents dreamed up to get us kids out of the house and into the open air. But over time, it became something much more, a part of our family's story, a place we all felt drawn back to. No matter what had happened that year, we always stayed somewhere around Boulder. That city, with its vibrant downtown, quirky shops, and endless bike trails, became as familiar to us as our own neighborhood back home. Year after year, it was the same rental cabin, perched right at the edge of a dense, endless forest. I could close my eyes and still see the trees swaying in the wind, the way the sun would peek between their branches in the morning, and how at night the darkness seemed to grow thicker, pressing up against the windows. By the time I turned 16, Colorado was more than just a place on the map. It was a feeling, a smell of pine needles and cold air, a sense of freedom I couldn't find anywhere else. That year, something changed for us. My parents, after years of dreaming about it, finally decided to buy a piece of land. The plan was to build our own vacation home there, a place we could come back to every year, a place that would always be ours. That summer, everything felt different. Maybe it was just the excitement of the new land, or maybe I was just getting older and starting to notice things I hadn't before. Whatever it was, I remember the trip as if it happened yesterday. Every detail sharp, every sound echoing in my mind even now. Usually we'd stay in Boulder, but this time, my parents wanted to try something new. We booked a cabin near Denver, hoping to explore new trails and towns. Denver was beautiful in a different way. The city felt alive, full of energy and light. The square downtown glowed at night, and I can still remember how the lights reflected in the windows of the coffee shops and restaurants. For a while, it felt like a dream. But those bright city lights aren't the reason that year stands out in my mind. It's what happened in the forest that changed everything. It was just after my 16th birthday, and my parents, maybe as a kind of reward, let me drive my mom's SUV. I had my license for all of 2 weeks, and already felt like I was an adult, ready to take on the world. Looking back, I see now that I was still a kid, gripping the steering wheel as if the car would fly apart if I let go. We woke up early that morning, still half asleep, and piled into the car. My little brother complained about having to wake up before the sun, while my sister just curled up with a blanket in the back seat and went straight back to sleep. My dad drove at first, letting me snooze as we rolled out of Denver and into the foothills. It wasn't until we got closer to the national forest, Arapaho, if I remember right, that he nudged me awake and handed me the keys. My hands were shaking as I slid into the driver's seat, not because I was nervous about driving, but because I was suddenly aware of how big everything was around me. The mountains loomed on all sides, the trees seemed to close in, and the road twisted and turned like something out of a movie. I tried to act cool, but my dad saw right through it, giving me a reassuring pat on the shoulder before settling in for the ride. We stopped for breakfast in town, eggs, toast, and the strongest coffee I'd ever tasted. I barely remember what we talked about. All I could think about was the drive ahead, the feeling of being responsible for everyone in the car. Once we got to the entrance of the park, my mom and sister decided they'd rather stay in the warmth of a coffee shop than ride bikes through the chilly forest. My brother, always up for an adventure, was eager to go. My dad laughed at our ridiculous biking outfits, the kind that made us look like we were about to race in the Tour de France, not just take a leisurely ride down a dirt trail. We set off together, the three of us. The trail was easy at first, just a gentle path winding through the trees. My brother was new to mountain biking, so we stuck to the green trails, the ones meant for beginners. He was nervous at first, wobbling on his bike, but after a while he found his balance. We laughed, racing each other, weaving between the trees. The air was cool and smelled like pine sap and wet earth. Eventually my brother grew more confident, and we moved on to a blue trail. This one was steeper, with sharp turns and rocky patches. I felt the adrenaline kick in as we sped down hills, the wind whipping past my face. I forgot all about the nerves, the city, even the cabin. For a while, it was just us in the forest. We stopped to rest at a bench beside the trail, gulping down water and catching our breath. As we sat there, we saw a man coming down the path, pushing his bike slowly. At first, I didn't notice the boy beside him, leaning heavily on his father's shoulder. The boy's leg was scraped and muddy, his face twisted in pain. My dad stood up, asking if they needed help. The father shook his head, explaining quietly that his son had slipped off the edge of the trail and tumbled into a dry riverbed full of rocks. He'd banged up his leg, but nothing seemed broken. My dad nodded, offering some words of comfort, and the two of them continued down the trail, disappearing around the bend. I didn't think much of it at the time. People fell all the time on these trails. That was just part of the adventure. But the way the man looked at us, a kind of haunted look in his eyes, stuck with me. We decided to head back, but curiosity got the better of me. As we rode up the side of a ravine, I spotted a bike lying abandoned just off the trail. It was the same one the boy had been riding. I slowed down, my breath catching in my throat. There was something wrong with the bike. It wasn't just lying in the dirt, as if it had been dropped in a hurry. There were deep scratches running down the side of the frame, 4 long gashes that cut through the paint and into the rubber of the tire. The cuts were ragged, uneven, as if something with claws had raked across the metal. I stared at the bike, my mind racing. I'd seen plenty of accidents before. Bikes bent and broken, chains snapped, seats torn. But this was different. It looked deliberate, like something had attacked the bike, not just a simple fall. My dad and brother caught up, and I pointed out the damage. My dad frowned, kneeling down to take a closer look. He ran his fingers over the gashes, shaking his head. "Probably just caught on a branch," he said, but there was something in his voice that told me he didn't really believe it. We pushed on, but the mood had changed. My brother rode closer to me, not saying much. I kept glancing over my shoulder, suddenly aware of how quiet the forest had become. Not long after, we noticed animal tracks on the trail. They hadn't been there before. The ground was soft from rain the night before, and these prints were fresh, deep indentations in the dirt, each one splitting off into 4 long, clawed toes. I'd never seen tracks like that. They were too big for a dog, too wide for a wolf. My dad crouched down to study them, his brow furrowed. I knelt beside him, reaching out to touch one of the prints. The earth was still damp and cool beneath my fingers. As I traced the outline of the claws, I heard a strange croaking sound from the woods behind us. It was low and guttural, almost like a frog, but louder, deeper, vibrating through the air. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. My dad stood up slowly, glancing around. My brother grabbed my arm, his eyes wide with fear. Out of the shadows, something lumbered into view. At first, I thought it was a bear. It was massive, bigger than any animal I'd ever seen in the wild. Its fur was thick and black, shining in the sunlight that filtered through the trees. Its claws were huge, curved and serrated, glinting as it moved. But it was the creature's face that made my blood run cold. It looked like it had been melted, the skin hanging in ragged strips from its jaw, exposing bone and muscle beneath. Its mouth hung open, drooling thick strings of saliva and blood. Its eyes were wild, rolling in its head, fixed on us with a hunger that made me want to run. For a moment, none of us moved. The creature sniffed the air, letting out another croak that echoed through the trees. Then, as if waking from a trance, I turned and ran, my legs pumping as fast as they could go. My dad and brother followed, crashing through the underbrush, bikes forgotten on the trail. We didn't stop running until we reached the coffee shop at the edge of the park, bursting through the door and startling the people inside. My mom and sister looked up in shock, but I couldn't speak. My chest heaved, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't hold my water bottle. My dad tried to explain, but the words came out jumbled, unbelievable even to us. We stayed in the cabin the rest of the trip. I barely left my room, afraid to even look out the window. The memory of the creature haunted my dreams. Those eyes, that ruined face, the sound of its claws on the rocks. Even now, years later, I still see it sometimes when I close my eyes. My family is planning another trip to Colorado soon, and though I try to act brave, I can't shake the feeling that the forest is watching, waiting for me to come back. Maybe it was just an animal, a bear deformed by disease or injury. Maybe my mind played tricks on me in that moment of fear. But deep down, I know what I saw was real, and I know that if I ever see those tracks again, I won't stop to look. I'll turn and run, and hope that this time the forest lets me go. I live in a small coastal town in Canada, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody else, and there's not much to do except walk around, hang out at the beach, or kill time in the handful of shops. Growing up here felt safe, or at least it used to. Between the years 2010 and 2014, when I was between 16 and 18, a few things happened that changed the way I felt about my home forever. The first time it happened was in the first week of September 2010. School had just started again, and I wasn't looking forward to it at all. I'd been having a rough time with a bully at school, a guy twice my size who seemed to make it his personal job to ruin my days. As usual, the school did nothing to help. I didn't have much choice but to keep going, though. That's just how things were. One evening, my parents set me out to get some groceries, sandwich supplies to last us until their regular shopping trip on the weekend. I didn't really mind. The shop was less than 15 minutes away, and I always got a soda for myself. Usually, the streets were filled with people, especially kids and dogs, but this night was weirdly quiet. I figured maybe everyone was still getting used to the new school year, or maybe they were all inside watching TV or finishing homework. I went into the store, grabbed what I needed, and made small talk with the woman working behind the counter. She was friendly, but my anxiety from school made me not want to talk much, so I made my excuses and left. On the way home, there were two ways I could walk. I could go straight up the road or take two other roads that looped back to the same spot. Between these roads was a big field, overgrown and wild back then, full of tall grass and tangled bushes. Stray animals used it as a home, and kids would hide there to smoke or just hang out away from adults. I always took the main road, especially when I was alone, since it was better lit because of the houses. But the stretch near the field was always kind of dark, except for a single, dim, almost always broken streetlight. I started my walk home, careful to watch my step because the road had potholes deep enough to ruin a car if you weren't paying attention. I stayed on the street itself, not the shoulder, just to avoid the worst holes. That's when I heard a noise in the field beside me, a sudden, sharp movement. I turned, thinking I'd see a stray cat or maybe a fox, since it was still the season for hunting and kittens. But what I saw was something I'll never forget. It was a head, at least the size of a grizzly bear's, maybe even bigger. Its fur was thick, black as the bottom of the ocean. It had huge, pointy ears, a long snout, and massive teeth that stuck out from gums as dark as its fur. I stared at it for a second, too shocked to move. Then I must have blinked, and suddenly I was running, heart hammering in my chest. The next thing I knew, I was at my house, slamming the door behind me and locking it as fast as I could. I tried to tell my parents what happened, that a giant black dog had charged me. They were surprised. I was the type of kid who'd try to make friends with any animal, not someone who'd be scared of a stray. My mom tried to calm me down, saying it was probably just a hungry stray drawn by the groceries I'd bought. Maybe she was right. I wanted to believe her, so I did. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen wasn't just a regular animal. The second time something happened was early January 2011, during the same school year. It was Christmas break, and I'd gone out for a walk around 8:30 or 9 at night. Normally, my parents didn't let me out that late, but since it was break, they told me just to be careful. Watch for drunk drivers, the usual warnings. I had mostly forgotten about what had happened in the fall and was back to walking the streets any time I wanted. It was freezing that night. So cold my iPod actually froze and stopped working. I tried to warm it up inside my coat, hoping it would turn back on so I could listen to music. The streets were slick with layers of ice, slush, and wet snow, and the streetlights, as usual, were out. I walked slowly, using the light from houses and the occasional passing car to see where I was going. As I walked, I realized just how quiet it was. Even during the holidays, it was never this silent. Normally, the area around the store was busy, no matter what time it was. But that night, I could hear cars from far away and nothing else. That's when I noticed someone standing under one of the dim streetlights. Just a dark figure. Back to me, dressed in all black. At first, I thought it was just a big guy, bundled up against the cold, maybe drunk. But something about the way he stood gave me the creeps. I decided to turn around and head for the nearest working streetlight. But as I did, my iPod suddenly turned on at full volume, blasting one of the loudest songs I had. The music echoed through the empty street. I glanced back at the man and felt my blood freeze. He turned his head just enough for me to see the side of his face. He didn't have a normal face. He had a long snout, and suddenly one of his ears, big, pointed, twitched and stood up. I didn't stick around to see anymore. I let out a yelp and ran home, slipping and sliding, but somehow not falling. When I got home, I told my parents there was a weird man hanging around the store, dressed all in black. I didn't tell them about the snout or the ear, even though my dad believes in strange things. He's the type to grab his hunting shotgun if he saw something weird. I doubted he'd believe me if I said I saw a dogman, or at least something like one. I thought maybe it had chased me, but I never saw it again. I didn't leave the house again until school started. Years went by. By the spring of 2014, I had mostly forgotten about the weird things that had happened before. I was an adult now, no longer had a curfew, and felt more confident wandering the town at night. The town had cleared out the old field, probably to stop so many stray animals from getting hit by cars, and maybe to sell the land. I'm not sure what happened to it, but it wasn't overgrown anymore. I got into the habit of walking all the streets in that area, especially since I knew a lot of the people who lived there. That night, I was kneeling on the sidewalk, petting a group of cats. Some were strays, some belonged to neighbors, but they all seemed to know me. I loved animals, and even wanted to own wolves or coyotes someday. It was peaceful, the way the cats purred and rubbed against me, just a normal night. Suddenly, one of the toughest cats, a battle-scarred Tom who never seemed afraid of anything, let out a yowl and shot off like he'd been set on fire. The rest of the cats scattered, and I jumped to my feet, heart pounding. I looked around, trying to see what had scared the cat. I thought maybe someone had used one of those high-pitched noise devices that only cats can hear. But then I saw it. Just outside the reach of a porch light, a large, shaggy black and gray dog was sitting, watching me. It looked like a cross between a wolfhound and a malamute, big and powerful. I watched it carefully, not sure if I should be scared or try to make friends. I figured maybe it was a new pet in the neighborhood, or maybe someone was visiting for Easter. It started moving toward me, slowly and awkwardly, almost like it was in pain. At first, I thought it was just old, maybe suffering from arthritis. But then it stepped into the light, and I realized in horror that it didn't have paws. It had hands, real hands, and it was crawling toward me like a person, moving in a way that no animal should. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I ran. I ran faster than I ever have in my life, not stopping for anything. I didn't even slow down when I passed the houses of family friends who lived nearby, even though I knew they had kids and pets and might be in danger too. All I could think about was getting home, slamming the door and locking it behind me. I never saw it again, and I hope I never do. One of my friends once joked about using me as bait to lure it back so he could see it for himself. I refused. No way was I ever putting myself in that kind of danger again. Now I never go out at night, not even into my own backyard. All that creature would have to do is jump a couple of fences and cross a field, and it would be at my door. There's hardly any light back there, plenty of places to hide, and I know now that there are things out there we can't explain. I don't care if anyone believes me. I know what I saw, and I know I was lucky to get away. I've hiked in the Appalachian and Blue Ridge Mountains more times than I can count. Out of all those places, my favorite has always been the endless stretches of mountains in Pennsylvania. There's something wild about it. Just miles and miles of forest, and when you're out there, you feel like you're in another world. A few years back, I went hiking with two guys from my high school wrestling team, Patrick LeBooz and John Nahay. We decided to make it a winter trip. Since the mountains in winter have their own beauty, all white and gray, the snow muffling everything and making it feel even more remote. I'd never camped in winter before, but I figured it would be fun. Looking back now, I'd use another word for it. No, it wasn't fun at all, at least not after what happened. We got a late start on our first day, which made us nervous because it's not a good idea to set up camp in the mountains after dark. By the time we finally found a spot, it was almost 6 in the evening. It wasn't snowing, so we built a campfire and tried to relax. We ended up sitting around the fire, talking about the old days at school and how life had changed since we graduated in 2010. It was now 2013, and life felt very different. But out there it was easy to forget about everything, except the fire and the cold. At some point, I asked if anyone had ever experienced anything scary in the woods. Patrick said, "Well, I have heard about this area, but I never took it too seriously." Of course, John and I pestered him until he finally gave in and told us the story. Patrick said a friend of his had seen Bigfoot in the exact area we were camping in. He described the creature the way you'd expect, a giant around 7 to 7.5 feet tall, weighing at least 600 pounds, with dark reddish-brown fur. He said its body was out of proportion, with extremely long arms and a heavy stomach. John and I looked at each other. The description was so specific that we couldn't just brush it off. I've always believed in Sasquatch and those kinds of creatures, but John was always skeptical. Seeing him take the story seriously made me think there was something to it. Patrick told us that his friend had found footprints too, and they were huge, 21 inches long. John tried to joke about it, saying, "I guess Shaquille O'Neal lent him his shoes," but I couldn't laugh. A foot that size sounded possible if we really were talking about a monster. I told Patrick that whatever it was probably long gone by now. But the truth was, none of us knew just how close it really was. The first few days passed without anything unusual happening. We enjoyed the peacefulness, the silence, and the feeling of being alone in the wild. On the 4th day, though, things started to change. Just past noon, a snow squall rolled in out of nowhere, blowing thick flakes everywhere, and making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. We decided to find some cover, and after searching for a while, we found a dense thicket of trees. It was perfect. Heavily wooded, but without the usual thorns or brambles that make it hard to move. We set up our tent inside the thicket, passed around a few military-style meals, and hunkered down. The The wind howled outside, but we were warm enough in our sleeping bags. The snow kept falling, but somehow we managed to sleep through it. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to take a look outside. About 8 inches of snow had fallen during the night, making everything look fresh and clean. It was cold, but not too bad for hiking. I was about to turn around and go back to the tent when I noticed something odd in the snow. There was a weird shape, almost like a giant footprint, but with only 4 toes. I stared at it, wondering if I should mention it to Patrick and John. Then, as I was looking around, I saw something that made my heart stop. I know what I saw, and I know I was wide awake. This was no dream or trick of the light. There, standing among a group of trees about 50 feet away, was something huge. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders, long arms, and thick legs. Its fur was a cinnamon color, making it stand out against the white snow. I froze, fighting the urge to scream or run. I just stood there, barely breathing, not even blinking. I was scared out of my mind, but I couldn't move. I backed up slowly, never taking my eyes off the creature. I thought I could hide in a spot behind some trees, but just as I was about to move, the creature turned its head and looked straight at me. It was like time stopped. I didn't even blink, just stared back at it, hoping it couldn't really see me. We stood like that for what felt like forever, maybe 20 seconds, before it finally turned away and lumbered off into the woods. I didn't move a muscle until it was completely out of sight. When I finally felt sure it was gone, fear took over, and I ran as fast as I could back toward the campsite. My legs felt weak and my breath came in short gasps, but I didn't stop until I saw the tent. When I got there, I saw that everything was already packed up. Patrick was waiting in the car, and John was stuffing the last of our gear into the trunk. I barely had time to ask what was going on before Patrick shouted, "Just get in the car so we can go." I didn't argue. I jumped into the back seat, and we drove away from the campsite without another word. We didn't stop until we reached a park ranger station. Once inside, Patrick finally told me what had happened. I don't know what it was, but that so-called fake monster was in our campsite right before you got back, he said. He explained that he and John had seen something huge moving outside and had hidden in the tent, lying flat on their backs so it wouldn't notice them. Patrick and John were both tough guys, not easily scared, so seeing them shaken up made me realize how real it all was. I told them about what I had seen too, how close I had been to the creature, and how it looked right at me. We found a park ranger and told him our story. The ranger just shook his head and said, "You aren't the first ones. In fact, you're the 15th, 16th, and 17th people to report something like this." He looked tired, almost like he'd heard these stories 1,000 times before. I keep thinking about closing that area, but it doesn't seem fair. I'm just glad you boys aren't hurt. We drove home in silence, none of us really wanting to talk about what had happened. I haven't gone back to that part of the mountains since, and I'm not sure I ever will. I still go hiking, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends, but there's always that memory in the back of my mind. I keep thinking about what would have happened if that creature had decided to come after me, or if it had noticed Patrick and John hiding in the tent. I don't think the outcome would have been good. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I remember the look in that creature's eyes as it turned to look at me. I wonder what it was thinking, if it was curious or just wanted to be left alone. Maybe it was as scared of us as we were of it, or maybe it was just another day for it, and we were the intruders. I tell this story to people sometimes, but I know not everyone believes me. I wouldn't have believed it myself if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. Now, I always keep my guard up when I'm out in the wild, and I never forget that there are things out there we can't explain. Whether you call it Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or something else, I know it's real. I saw it, and so did my friends, and I hope I never see it again. I was 15 the summer I spent a month with my cousins at my grandma's house. It was August, and my cousins' ages ranged from 10 to 14, so I was the oldest. There were 4 of us all together, me, 10, 13, and 14 years old. Most nights, we'd stay up late in the basement, telling scary stories and daring each other to do silly things. My grandma's house sat on the edge of a small rural suburb, and while you could see a neighbor's porch lights from the front, the backyard was a different world. Beyond the yard, thick forest stretched out for acres, crisscrossed with man-made paths and old animal trails. Each house in that area was built on a hill, so the basement wasn't fully underground. You'll see why that matters later. One night, a few weeks into my stay, we decided to build a campfire in the open patch of the yard to the east. The air was heavy and warm, but you could already feel a chill creeping in, hinting that summer was almost over. The sky was deep blue, not quite black, and shadows moved slowly through the trees. If you looked up, you could see a sliver of the moon through the branches. From where we sat, you couldn't see any other houses, just our fire and the woods all around. We roasted marshmallows and played truth or dare, half laughing, half scaring each other, with more stories. Around 11, my 14-year-old cousin dared me and the 13-year-old to walk down one of the paths into the woods for at least 10 minutes, just to see if we'd get spooked. I said yes right away. I'd always thought of myself as level-headed and not easily scared. My cousin, though, was more hesitant and kept glancing at the shadows. We didn't bother bringing a flashlight because it wasn't completely dark yet, and we thought we'd be able to see the path and each other just fine. We started off down the trail, trying to act brave and make jokes, but after 5 minutes, even the glow of our fire had faded to a flicker between the trees. Everything felt quiet, almost too quiet, like the whole woods was holding its breath. We had just decided to turn around when I stopped dead in my tracks. There, standing right in the middle of the path ahead, was something I'll never forget. At first, I thought it was just a big dog, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was hunched over, its long front arms almost touching the ground. It had a weird, twisted body, part dog, part human, and its hands looked too much like human hands. But its head was wrong, too, shaped like a person's but stretched out, with jaws that looked like they could snap a branch in two. The worst part was its eyes. They glowed a bright, icy white, and when it turned to look at us, I felt like it was staring straight through me. I couldn't move. For a second, it was like the world had frozen. Then, in a blur, it dashed away from us, that crashing off through the brush toward the creek that cut through my grandma's yard. My cousin and I just stood there, paralyzed with fear, until suddenly, we both found our voices and screamed as loud as we could. The sound was so wild and desperate that it brought the others running. I barely remember what happened next. There were hands grabbing me, voices shouting, and then everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in bed, under the covers in the basement room. That basement was our sleeping spot, and the side with our beds had big sliding glass doors that looked out over the backyard. My bed was right up against one of those huge windows, and when I opened my eyes the next morning, I could see my cousins outside, playing down below. The sun was up, but the air was cool, and there was a light breeze rattling the leaves. I threw on a jacket and ran outside to join them, skipping breakfast because I didn't want to miss anything. As soon as I got outside, I realized no one was actually playing. My cousins were running to find my grandma, looking scared and confused. Her 2 dogs, who were usually barking and jumping all over us, were lying on the ground. They had been ripped apart, torn up in a way that made my stomach drop. There was blood on the grass and tufts of fur scattered everywhere. My grandma looked shaken, but tried to comfort us, saying maybe a coyote or something wild had gotten into the yard. That night, everyone went to bed early, too upset to even talk about what had happened. It was hard to fall asleep, but I must have drifted off. Then, in the middle of the night, maybe 2 in the morning, I woke up because something hit my head. I sat up, rubbing my forehead, and saw that my cousins were all sitting together on the double bed across from me, wide-eyed and silent. They didn't say anything. The 13-year-old just nodded toward the window next to my bed. I turned, just a little, not sure what to expect. Pressed against the glass was a face. I can't describe it perfectly, only that it looked even worse up close. Twisted, pale, with gaping eyes that seemed too big and round, staring right down at me. Its breath fogged the glass, and its mouth hung open, showing rows of dark, broken teeth. I screamed louder than I ever have in my life. The thing flinched, then bolted off into the night. My grandma ran downstairs as soon as she heard the scream. We told her what happened, and she called the police. They came out and searched the yard, looking for footprints or any signs of an intruder, but they found nothing. There was no explanation for what we saw. The next morning, I packed my bags and left for home. I haven't gone back to my grandma's house at night since then. Even now, years later, that memory still sends chills down my spine. I grew up in Florida, in Tallahassee, and for most of my life, it was a good place to live. The sun was always shining, and I have a lot of happy memories from my childhood. But that all changed a few years ago, after something happened that still haunts me to this day. It's the reason I moved away from Florida and started over somewhere else. Even now, it's hard to talk about, but I want to get it all out. It all started in January of 2017, when I was 16 years old. I had just gotten my first job at a Chick-fil-A in town. Honestly, it was a good job for a high school student, and if you're ever looking for work, I'd say it's a great place to start. That night, I was scheduled for a 4 to 11 p.m. shift. Since I was new, I was getting trained on how to close up the restaurant, cleaning all the stations, doing dishes, mopping the floors, that kind of thing. Chick-fil-A closes at 10, but employees can't leave until everything's clean, and because I was 16, the law said I had to clock out at 11 on the dot. When it was time, I finished up my last chore, clocked out, and left the building. All the employees had to park in the back lot, away from the customer spaces, so I walked across the empty lot, unlocked my car, and got in. The roads were almost deserted at that hour, which meant I could get home a little faster than usual, maybe 12 or 15 minutes instead of 20. I started my usual drive home, tired but feeling good about the day. After a few minutes on the main road, I turned onto a shortcut that I used all the time. This road was a little sketchy, especially at night. It wound through some trees, didn't have any streetlights, and there was a big cemetery along one side that always gave me chills. I'd driven this way plenty of times, and sometimes I'd swear I heard strange noises coming from the direction of the cemetery, almost like screams. It was probably just animals, or maybe my imagination, but it always made me uneasy. Still, it was the fastest way home. That night I was extra careful, driving with my high beams on. I was halfway down the dark road just passing the cemetery, when out of nowhere, a huge black shape bolted across the road right in front of my car. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding, barely stopping in time. I was completely shaken and just sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. My eyes scanned the road and the woods around me, searching for whatever it was. That's when I saw it. Standing just off the side of the road, in the beam of my headlights, was a creature I'll never forget. It was massive, at least 7 or 8 feet tall, with the muscular body of a bodybuilder. Its head was shaped like a wolf or a huge dog, with long, pointed ears and a snout full of white, sharp teeth. It looked straight at me, almost like it was grinning, and its eyes glowed with a bright yellow reflection. I was frozen with fear. I wanted to drive away, but I couldn't move. The thing just stared at me for what felt like forever, and then suddenly, I snapped out of it and hit the gas, speeding down the road as fast as I could. In the rearview mirror, I could still see its glowing eyes watching me as I drove away. Even after I turned the next corner and lost sight of it, I kept checking the mirror, half expecting to see it running after me. When I finally got home, I rushed inside, locked every door and window, and sat on my bed, trying to calm down. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and my mind kept replaying the image of that monster over and over. I kept telling myself I must have imagined it, but it felt so real. I barely slept that night, lying awake, convinced that thing had followed me home and was waiting outside for me to let my guard down. I didn't tell anyone about what happened, not even my parents or my friends. I knew no one would believe me. They'd say it was a bear, or a trick of the light, or just stress from working late. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen wasn't any ordinary animal. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist. And as scary as that night was, it wasn't the end. Over the next 2 years, I had more encounters with that thing. A few months after that first night, I was coming home late again from work. My dad had to leave early in the morning for his job, so he asked me to park in the grass next to the driveway so I wouldn't block him in. It was late and the street was empty. As I got out of my car, I grabbed my stuff and looked over to the left. In the shadows, hidden among the bushes, I saw those same glowing yellow eyes watching me. I froze. My heart started pounding in my chest. The creature was there, staring at me. It let out a deep, guttural growl that made the hair on my neck stand up. I knew I couldn't run to the car. I was too far away and my hands were full. I bolted for the front door, praying it wouldn't catch me. Luckily, my parents always left the door unlocked when I worked late, and I managed to get inside, slam the door shut, and lock it behind me. I looked out the window, but it was gone. That night, I decided I couldn't keep doing this. The next morning, I changed my work schedule, telling my manager I couldn't work late shifts anymore. I didn't give a reason, just said I needed to get home earlier. I was scared to be out after dark, and I was terrified that the creature had figured out where I lived. I started seeing it more and more, sometimes just standing at the edge of the woods behind my house, sometimes watching me from the street when I took out the trash or let my dog outside. I started to worry about my dog too, afraid that one night I'd let him out and never see him again. I made a new rule in the house. After sunset, the dog stayed inside, no matter what. I also wondered if it ever tried to get into the house while we were sleeping. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, feeling like something was watching me, and I'd look out the window and see nothing. Other nights, I'd hear strange noises outside, but I was too scared to check. I never found any scratches or paw prints near the doors, but that didn't make me feel any safer. I just felt like I was being hunted, like I was prey, and this thing was stalking me. For about a year, those encounters kept happening. Sometimes it would go months without any sign, and I'd almost convince myself it was gone. But then one night I'd see those glowing eyes again. Every time, I'd feel the same rush of fear, the same certainty that I was in real danger. By the time I turned 18, I was desperate to leave. I applied to colleges out of state and got into the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. As soon as I could, I packed up my things and moved to North Carolina. My parents eventually sold the house in Tallahassee and moved too. I haven't seen the creature since I left Florida, and I hope I never do again. I'm a lot happier now, and I finally feel safe, but part of me will always be looking over my shoulder, wondering if I'll ever see those yellow eyes staring at me again. All I know is that I hope no one else has to go through what I did, and if you ever see something you can't explain, trust your gut and get away as fast as you can. When I first looked across the canyon, I could see old beds, wooden ladders, and even cave drawings right there on the cliffs, almost clear as day. I don't know what came over me, but I suddenly became obsessed with the idea of going over there, to those ancient ruins. I'm not Navajo, so I guess I thought the warnings didn't apply to me. It felt like something beyond curiosity, a pull, like there was some invisible magnet drawing me toward those cliff dwellings. I can't really explain the feeling, but it was almost as if I was supposed to be there, like I belonged there, even though I knew I didn't. Ignoring the little voice in my head, I started making my way down the cliffs, without a rope, planning to cross the canyon and climb back up to the ruins. Looking back, it was a terrible idea. The rocks were loose, and the slope was steep, and I kept slipping, catching myself with my hands, my nerves frazzled. I was so frustrated, feeling like a kid being kept away from something special, that I almost started to cry out of sheer helplessness. But just as I was about to try again, I heard an unmistakable growl rising up from the canyon floor. I couldn't see what made it. There were too many trees, but I immediately thought, mountain lion, and scrambled back up the cliff faster than I'd gone down. I didn't say anything to the others about what happened. We spent a while longer just shooting guns at some old cans, but the strangeness wasn't over. Later, while Sarah was taking aim, the whole area suddenly went quiet. No wind, no birds, not even the sound of insects. Then, right behind us, maybe 20 feet away, we all heard a sound that was halfway between a growl and a harsh, raspy laugh, almost like a lion crossed with a hyena. We could see the ground around us and the cliff tops too. There was nothing there. But even weirder, while the rest of us heard it at a distance, Luke said it sounded like it was right by his ear. We were all a little freaked out, but we decided to camp out there anyway, thinking maybe it was just some animal messing with us, or our nerves playing tricks. We didn't bring tents or sleeping bags, just blankets, and we slept under the stars with a little fire burning nearby. I actually fell asleep pretty fast, feeling safe with the others and the guns close by. But I woke up a few hours later and realized everyone else was awake, lying on their backs with their eyes wide open, listening. The canyon was filled with strange noises, knocking sounds like someone was banging rocks together, echoing all around. Sometimes it was far away, sometimes closer, and sometimes right nearby, like some weird code being tapped out in the darkness. There were no animal sounds at all, just the constant, methodical clacking. We listened to it for what felt like 10 minutes, everyone too scared to speak. Finally, David, who's always the tough one and never superstitious, just sat up and yelled, "Shh." The noises stopped immediately. The silence felt even scarier than the banging. We all sat there, not sure what to do. Then from the direction of the ruins, a new sound started, high-pitched, almost like a zebra's call, mixed with strange squeaky trills. It got louder and more urgent, and then the banging sound started up again, this time with even more chaos. Now there were other animal noises, wolves or coyotes barking, monkeys screeching, owls hooting, and that terrible zebra noise above it all. It was like a nightmare symphony echoing around the canyon, and every hair on my body stood on end. We didn't talk it over. We didn't need to. We all just started grabbing our stuff, dousing the fire, and running back to the car as fast as we could. The noises followed us the entire time. Even after we got back, I couldn't shake the feeling. My Navajo mother, who had been worried about us before, sat down next to me before I went to bed. She could tell something was wrong, even though we hadn't told her what happened, partly because we didn't want to get a lecture about messing with spirits. She asked if anything strange had happened, and I just started telling her everything, especially about how I felt drawn to the ruins and frustrated that I couldn't get to them. As soon as I finished, she looked really concerned. I asked her what was wrong. She said, "The spirits in the ruins like to lure people up. When they get up there, the spirits push them off. That's why we don't go there." I felt even colder inside after hearing that. After that, I stayed creeped out for the rest of the visit. There was a public access kiva in town, open to tourists, and since I couldn't get close to the ruins, I went there alone, ignoring my family's superstition about entering the dwellings of other tribes. I figured nothing could happen to me in a kiva, right? Well, it wasn't cliffs, so at least nothing could push me off, but it turned out there are other ways for something to get to you. A few weeks later, I was back at my job in Salt Lake City, working third shift at a call center. It was my first night alone, and I still felt weird after that trip, like something was following me. My brothers had even warned me about skinwalkers, but I didn't really believe them. I didn't smoke, but I liked to go out with coworkers during smoke breaks just to chat. That night, I hung around in the doorway instead of going outside. There was this awful, heavy feeling, like a cloud of dread hanging over me. Finally, I told myself I was being ridiculous and decided to go outside and stand there, just to prove I wasn't scared. The other smokers were heading in, but I walked out, put my hands in my pockets, and tried to act normal. I looked at the sky, at the parking lots. That's when I saw something moving across one of the distant parking lots, about 100 feet away. It looked like a dog at first, thin and gray, limping badly like it was hurt. For a moment, my instincts as an animal lover took over, and I started toward it, calling softly like you would for a stray dog. But then I stopped, because something was wrong. The creature moved like a person would if they were down on their hands and feet, not like any dog I'd ever seen. Its back end swayed from side to side, and its legs were bloody. When it heard me, it didn't turn around. It just stopped, stiff as a board. After a moment, it turned its head over its shoulder, and I saw its face. Its eyes were way too big for a dog, huge and round, looking right into mine, full of something that felt almost human. Its teeth were bared, and it made a sound like a growling whistle, a noise no animal I know could make. It was like it was mocking me. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I remembered the stories. When skinwalkers appear as animals, they don't have tails. This thing didn't have a tail, and every part of me screamed to run. I turned and ran back to the building, not looking back until I had the doors shut and locked behind me. When I finally looked again, the thing was gone. When I told my brothers, they were certain it was a skinwalker. They blessed my apartment, their own places, everything. I never saw that bloody, broken dog again. But I also never wanted to go near any cliff ruins, caves, or places like that ever again. Sometimes it's not just superstition. Sometimes you feel the pull of something ancient and hungry, and the best thing you can do is listen to the warnings, even if you think they're not meant for you. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. My grandmother's farm was tucked away on 15 acres of rolling Alabama land, just north of a little place called Hayden. The house sat up on a gentle hill, surrounded by wild grass that in summer grew so tall it would brush against your knees as you walked up the winding driveway. It always felt like the drive from our own home took forever, especially when I was young and impatient, legs swinging in the back seat as we watched the towns and fields slip past the window. We only visited a few times a year, mostly during the hottest stretches of summer, but every single trip felt like a small adventure. I can remember how my heart would leap as the gravel crunched under our tires, the old house coming into view, sitting patiently on its hill, looking out over the world. My grandfather, Elmer, had built it himself with his own hands, every board and nail, every shingle of the rusty tin roof. By the time I was old enough to form memories, he was already gone, taken by what everyone said was a tragic hunting accident. But his presence lived on in the house and the stories my grandmother would share. The porch had seen better days, boards gone gray and soft in places, but I always felt at home there, barefoot and watching the sun dip behind the woods that circled the property. The old barn sat behind the house, leaning a little to one side, its faded red paint peeling off like old sunburn. As a child, none of that mattered at all. My sister and I thought it was the greatest place in the world, our own little kingdom. We would wake with the sun, always up earlier than our parents, sometimes even before the birds started singing. Breakfast was simple. Eggs with thick slices of bacon, toast with strawberry jam, all cooked on the same black cast iron pans my grandmother's mother had used before her. The kitchen always smelled like coffee and biscuits, the air warm and full of the sounds of her humming as she moved about. After breakfast, the whole world was ours. My sister and I would dash outside, still licking jam from our fingers, and race across the open fields, chasing after grasshoppers or rolling down the gentle slopes until we were dizzy and breathless. We'd take old inner tubes and float in the little creek that wound along the edge of the property, its water cool even in the dead of July. Sometimes, when the heat was too much, we'd climb up into the giant oak tree that grew beside the house. Its branches were so long and heavy they nearly touched the ground, and we could spend hours up there, hiding from imaginary enemies or pretending to be explorers lost in the jungle. My grandmother was the heart of the place, always there when we needed her, quick to soothe a skinned knee or settle a fight between siblings. She was small and bird-like, but tough as nails. Her hair was a thick cloud of white, tied back with bits of string, her hands covered in lines from years of work. Inside, she taught us to make things with whatever we could find. Daisy chains, stick whistles, little animals out of scraps of cloth. She'd tell stories about growing up in Louisiana, stories of hurricanes and bayous, of voodoo and old magic, of her own mother who spoke French and could charm warts off with a word. There was always music in the house, too. Sometimes she'd sing as she worked, a sweet, wavering voice that would float through the open windows and drift out into the yard. When the afternoons were too hot, we'd pile onto her old quilt in front of the box fan, and she'd read to us from her stack of worn-out books, or just talk about the people who'd come before, her parents, my grandfather, and all the others whose faces stared out at us from yellowed photographs on the mantel. As much as I loved those summers, There was always something a little strange about my grandmother. She was wise and gentle, but there were things she simply would not talk about, and rules she insisted we follow, no matter what. Every time we arrived, she would pull us close, hold our hands in her frail fingers, and look at us with those bright, serious eyes. She'd say, "Now listen to me, children. These rules are not to be broken, you hear? Never leave food outside, no singing after dark, and never, never go into the woods." Her voice was always gentle but firm, and even as we grew older and bolder, we never dared to question her too much. The first two rules made sense to me, at least as a kid. We lived in the country. Leaving food out meant inviting raccoons or possums, maybe even a hungry stray dog. And as for singing after dark, maybe it would draw attention, or maybe it was just an old superstition. But the third rule was the hardest. The woods were so close, so thick and green and full of secrets. The tree line started just a few hundred yards from the back porch, and the trees looked like they went on forever. When the sun was high, the woods were just a shadowy edge to the fields. But at dusk, they seemed to press closer, the trunks standing like silent guards. We'd ask her sometimes, usually in the afternoons when we were restless and tired of the same old games. "Grandma, can we please go exploring in the woods?" We'd plead, listing all the reasons why we were old enough, smart enough, or fast enough to take care of ourselves. She never raised her voice, never got angry, but her answer was always the same. "No, Sha. The rules are for your safety. You mustn't break them." One time when my sister was still little, maybe 3 or 4, we sat on the back steps eating bologna sandwiches. I remember how she liked her sandwiches flattened out, the bread cut into perfect little squares. She finished hers in a hurry and followed me inside, forgetting her plate on the step. That evening, after dinner, we all settled in front of the fireplace under one of Grandma's big quilts. She was telling a story about her mother when we heard a strange, scratching sound at the back door. I felt her whole body tense, just for a second. My dad was on the floor playing cards, and he glanced up, his face going tight around the eyes. "Probably just a raccoon," he said, trying to sound casual as he stood up. But Grandma stopped him with a touch on the arm. "Let me see, dear," she said softly, and left the room for a moment. When she returned, she was holding my sister's empty plate. My sister saw the plate and started to cry, maybe from fear or just guilt. Grandma knelt beside her and hugged her tight. "It's okay, little one. Let's just try not to forget next time, all right?" She didn't scold, just held my sister until she stopped crying, then settled us all back down by the fire as if nothing had happened. That night, curiosity got the better of me. Long after everyone had gone to bed, I slipped out from under the covers and tiptoed to the back door. The house didn't have air conditioning, so we often left the main doors open to catch a breeze, only closing the screens to keep out bugs. A single yellow bulb lit the steps, and as I leaned out, I saw the strangest thing. Dozens of long black hairs were stuck to the top 2 steps, shining in the weak light. I reached out to touch one, then pulled my hand back, suddenly uneasy. After that, I started to notice other strange things happening. The next summer, while walking along the edge of the woods with my sister, we found the remains of a deer. Or at least, what I thought was a deer. It was so torn up, it was hard to tell. The head was missing, and the body was shredded, blood staining the ground all around. I'd never seen anything like it. When I ran to tell Grandma, she just shook her head and told us not to go near it, that my dad would take care of it. A year after that, we were woken in the middle of the night by loud banging from the barn. The wind was rattling the windows, and at first I thought it was just a storm. But when we went out the next morning, we found the barn door torn off its hinges, one side splintered and hanging loose. Everything inside had been ripped apart. Bags of feed, old tools, even a heavy trunk with rusty locks. Grandma said it was probably just thieves, maybe after scrap metal, but it didn't make sense. The barn was too far from the road, and there was nothing inside worth stealing. There were other times too, odd noises at night, dead animals found in the fields, moments when the air seemed to go heavy and silent for no reason. Once, when my sister wandered too close to the woods, my father ran across the yard faster than I'd ever seen him move. He scooped her up, carried her back to the house, and locked the door behind him. She cried and cried, but he never explained what had scared him so much. I started to think that there was something about the farm, something just out of sight, waiting in the shadows. The summer I turned 16 was the last time I visited. By then, I was taller, stronger, and growing restless with what felt like childish rules. I loved my grandmother deeply, but I couldn't help but feel stifled. I'd explored every inch of the fields and the creek, climbed every tree, caught every frog and bug. The woods, so close and so forbidden, had become a kind of obsession. It was the hottest day of July, the air thick and buzzing with cicadas. My grandmother had gone down for her afternoon nap, and my parents were running errands in town. I grabbed a bottle of water and my old sneakers and set out along the creek, my heart pounding with excitement and nerves. The creek wound through the edge of the property and disappeared into the trees, the water dark and cool on my bare feet. I walked slowly, following the bank, letting the hush of the woods close in around me. The trees grew thicker and the light grew dim. I could hear the gurgle of the water, the rustle of leaves, and the faraway calls of birds. The smell of damp earth and moss filled my nose. I picked my way over roots and rocks, feeling bold and foolish at the same time. It felt like another world inside those trees, quieter and older than anywhere I'd ever been. After a while, I realized I could no longer hear any birds or bugs. The silence was sudden, as if the woods were holding their breath. I stopped listening, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat. I started to feel uneasy, remembering all the times Grandma had warned us. I turned to head back, but before I could take a step, I heard a stick crack behind me. I froze, every muscle tight. Something was moving through the underbrush, slow and heavy. I tried to tell myself it was just a deer, or maybe a stray dog, but the footsteps were too deliberate. I turned around, squinting into the gloom. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but then it stepped into a shaft of weak sunlight. It was tall, much taller than any man I'd ever seen, at least 7 feet, with a wide chest and long arms. Dark, shaggy fur covered its body, but its face was wrong. It looked like a man and a wolf at the same time, with a long snout, pointed ears, and eyes that glowed a sickly yellow. It looked right at me, its gaze piercing and hungry. I stumbled back, slipped on the wet sand, and landed hard in the shallow water. The shock of the cold jolted me to my senses, and I scrambled to my feet, not daring to look back. I ran as fast as I could, branches whipping at my face, thorns tearing at my legs. I don't remember how I got out of the woods, only that my feet hurt and my lungs burned by the time I saw the house. I burst through the door, slamming it behind me. My grandmother was sitting at the kitchen table, shelling beans, her face calm, but her eyes worried. I must have looked wild, soaked, muddy, barefoot, and shaking. She didn't ask what happened right away. Instead, she quietly bandaged the cut on my foot, then sat me down beside her. "Were you in the woods?" she asked softly. I nodded, unable to find the words to explain. I started to cry, all the fear and guilt washing over me. She didn't scold me. Instead, she stroked my hair and began to speak, her voice low and steady. "What you saw was the loup-garou," she said. "Some call it the rougarou, especially in Louisiana. My mother used to tell me stories about a creature that was part man, part wolf, a monster that wandered the swamps and snatched up children who strayed too far from home. When I was young, I thought it was just a way to keep us in line. But when we moved here, I learned the stories were true." She told me how my grandfather, years before, had come across a mutilated animal in the woods. He thought it was a bear, so he tracked it, believing he needed to protect the farm. What he found wasn't any bear, but a creature like the one I had just seen. They fought, and though my grandfather killed it, he was badly injured in the process. After that, he fell sick. That night, he tossed and moaned in his sleep, his skin growing hot and his eyes sinking deep into his head. By morning, his hair had grown long and black all over his body. Then he was gone. Grandma never saw him again, not truly. Sometimes she would see him at the edge of the woods, hiding in the shadows. She would leave food on the back steps, and it would be gone by morning. Sometimes she would sit on the porch and sing, and she would see him, the creature, step out just close enough to listen. But over time, he grew less and less human. Dead animals started to turn up. She heard howling in the night, louder and wilder than any wolf. That was when she knew he was lost forever. She put a hand on my shoulder and looked into my eyes. "That's why I made the rules, child, to keep you safe. The loup-garou is drawn to food, to singing, to the things that comforted him when he was still himself. And if you go into the woods, you won't come out. I'm grateful you're here, safe." She paused, wiping a tear from her cheek. "This must be your last trip here. Now that he's seen you, he will want your blood. He will hunt you. If you try to fight him, even if you have a gun, you'll become what he is. That's the curse of the loup-garou. The one who kills him becomes the next." I slept that night with the door locked, trembling at every sound. The next morning, my parents packed our bags and we drove away, the house shrinking behind us, the woods watching from the shadows. I never went back. Sometimes, though, when I close my eyes, I see the house on the hill, the porch with its peeling paint, the old oak tree, and the dark line of the woods. I hear my grandmother's voice, singing softly in the kitchen, and I remember the yellow eyes shining in the shadows. Some rules I learned are there for a reason. Even when the world is full of sunshine and the grass is green, there are things in the shadows that are older and hungrier than we'll ever know. And if you ever find yourself alone in the woods, remember what my grandmother taught me. Never leave food outside. Don't sing after dark. And whatever you do, don't go into the woods. The first time I ever saw the thing, I was convinced I was losing my mind. It was about 2 years ago in North Texas, not far from the old town of Jefferson. I remember the drive out there with my friend Jim. He'd always been the one to talk me into these weekend hunts. We loaded the truck early before dawn, sleep still in our eyes, thermoses of cheap coffee steaming in the cup holders. The highways out of Dallas always seemed endless, the scenery a mix of pines, rusty wire fences, and old barns sagging under the Texas sun. We'd been planning this trip for weeks. Jim had found some land through a buddy of his, a patch of woods and fields where deer were said to move thick as cattle at dusk. When we pulled up to the old trailhead, it was barely light, the air fresh and a little cold, a thin mist hanging over the ground. We parked beside the gate and hiked our gear into the woods, the sounds of our boots crunching through last autumn's leaves. I always loved the feeling of settling in. We set up in an old wooden blind on the edge of a clearing, facing east so we'd have the sun behind us. The field was wild, dotted with stubborn clumps of grass and wildflowers, the woods hemming it in on 3 sides. I can remember how quiet it was, the only sounds the distant calls of crows and the low hum of insects waking up. We barely spoke, just sipped our coffee and let the forest settle back around us. Jim was always the better shot, but I had the steadier nerves. He could sit for hours, not making a sound, barely breathing, just waiting. We both sat there, watching the field, waiting for movement. It felt like time had slowed down, the sun crawling higher, the shadows shifting and stretching. It must have been almost noon when it happened. I had started to doze off, my mind wandering. Then Jim nudged me. "Wake up, man," he whispered, his eyes wide and fixed on the tree line. I followed his gaze and saw it, a huge buck, antlers wide as a car door, stepping out of the shadows into the open. My breath caught. It was the kind of animal that makes a hunter forget to breathe. I raised my rifle, lining up the crosshairs, but as I peered through the scope, something in my chest tightened. The buck moved strangely, almost limping. Its fur was patchy, dull, and stretched tight over its bones. As I focused, a chill ran through me. Its eyes were a milky white, like glass marbles, and its knees looked raw, the skin peeling away in strips, exposing dark muscle underneath. Jim's voice cut through my shock. "What the fuck? That's not a normal buck," he hissed. I turned to look at him, and he was pale as a sheet, hand shaking slightly as he peered through his own scope. "Look at it, man. Really look." I did. My finger hovered over the trigger, but the sense of wrongness grew. The thing stood in the field, completely silent. The air felt heavy, like the woods were holding their breath. Even the birds had stopped singing. We watched it for at least 10 minutes, not daring to move, not even sure what we were seeing. Finally, as quietly as it had come, the creature turned and wandered off, disappearing back into the woods. It didn't move like any deer I'd ever seen, almost like something pretending to be a deer, but getting the movements wrong. When it was gone, Jim and I just sat there, stunned. Neither of us said a word for a long time. When we finally spoke, our voices were hushed, like we were afraid of being overheard. "Let's get out of here," Jim finally said, and I nodded. We packed up and left, the uneaten snacks and unopened beers forgotten in our bags. The drive back was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I tried to tell myself it was just a sick animal, maybe hit by a car or suffering from disease, but some part of me knew better. For months afterward, I tried not to think about it. I didn't talk about it with Jim, and when I caught myself staring at shadows in my backyard, I forced myself to look away. Sometimes I'd wake up from strange dreams, white eyes in the darkness, the sound of hooves dragging through dead leaves. But life went on. I went back to work, paid my bills, saw friends, tried to laugh about it all. I thought that would be the end of it. But a year later, I saw it again. This time in Shepherd, Texas, an hour north of Houston, thick with pines and swamps. Jim had convinced me to join him for another hunt. We had both gotten braver with distance, talked ourselves into believing the first encounter was just a fluke. We walked into the woods before dawn, flashlights bobbing in the darkness. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and pine needles. The woods in East Texas are different from North Texas. Closer, darker, the trees crowding in, the ground soft and spongy underfoot. We didn't talk much, just kept our eyes open and our rifles ready. After a few hours, we stopped by a creek, water trickling over rocks, and sat down to rest. That's when we saw it. At first, I thought it was another deer, maybe a big buck standing at the edge of the water. But as I squinted, I realized it was the same thing as before. Same milky eyes, same ruined skin. It was standing on two legs, hunched and wrong, as if it had forgotten how to be a deer at all. Before we could move, it looked right at us, its head cocked in a sickly, unnatural way. Then it let out a noise, a sound I'll never forget. Something between a scream and a howl, so loud and sharp that it felt like a knife in my ears. Jim and I both dropped to our knees, hands clamped over our ears, the world spinning with pain. The noise only lasted a few seconds, but it felt like forever. When it stopped, we looked up, and the thing was still there, staring. Then it started walking toward us, slow and deliberate, each step crunching in the dead leaves. We didn't wait. We turned and ran, crashing through the undergrowth, branches whipping at our faces. My heart hammered in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. We could hear it behind us the whole time, just far enough back that we never caught a glimpse, but close enough that we could hear its heavy, shuffling footsteps. It never sped up or slowed down, never gained or lost ground. It was like it was herding us, guiding us to the edge of the woods. When we broke through the trees onto the road, we didn't stop running. Jim's truck was parked on the shoulder, keys already in his hand. We dove into the cab, slammed the doors, and Jim gunned the engine, gravel spraying out behind us. Neither of us looked back. We drove in silence for miles, the world rushing past in a blur of green and brown. We didn't talk about it for a long time after that. When we finally did, it was late at night, beers in hand, the TV playing quietly in the background. We tried to convince ourselves it was just some sick animal, maybe a bear or a deer with disease, but the fear was always there, just under the surface, waiting for a quiet moment to bubble up. I avoided hunting for a while after that. The woods no longer felt safe. Even walking my dog at night made my skin crawl. Every shadow looked like the thing, every noise made me jump. But the last time I saw it was only a few weeks ago, and it was the closest call yet. I was spending the night at my girlfriend's house in Shepherd. We'd just finished a movie, the house quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. She lived on the edge of town, her backyard running right up to the tree line. I always thought it was peaceful, the woods stretching out behind her house like an ocean of green. It was late, almost midnight. I went outside for a smoke, the night warm and still. The porch light cast a pale circle on the grass, the rest of the yard lost in shadow. I stood there half asleep, thinking about nothing, when I noticed movement at the edge of the woods. At first, I thought it was just a tree moving in the breeze, but then I saw the figure. Tall, thin, standing perfectly still among the trees. I squinted, trying to make out details, but the darkness seemed to swallow everything. A shiver ran through me. I called out, half joking, half nervous, "Hey, you see something out there?" I kept my voice calm, but inside, my heart was beating fast. I called for my girlfriend, asking her to grab a flashlight and her pistol. She knew I wasn't someone to get spooked easily, so she didn't hesitate. She handed me the light and the gun, her face serious. I pointed the flashlight toward the trees, the beam catching on the thing standing there. My blood ran cold. It was the same creature as before, but this time it looked different. Its mouth was hanging wide open, as if it was screaming in silence, its jaw stretching impossibly far. I could see rows of sharp, broken teeth. Its eyes glowed white, and the skin around its mouth looked torn, almost as if it had been stretched out of shape. I aimed the pistol at it, hands shaking. "Go inside," I told my girlfriend, my voice shaking. "Keep the door open, stay right by it in case I need to run." She nodded, backing into the house, but never taking her eyes off me. I turned back to the thing, heart pounding, and fired 3 rounds into the night. The noise was deafening, the gun kicking in my hand. For a split second, I thought maybe it would run. Instead, it screamed. A sound so loud and piercing it felt like my ears would bleed. It charged at me, moving faster than I thought possible, legs moving in unnatural jerks, mouth still open wide. I bolted for the house, stumbling up the steps, and my girlfriend slammed the door behind me, locking it tight. The thing hit the wall with a force that shook the whole house, like a sledgehammer slamming into concrete. The impact echoed through the rooms, rattling the pictures on the walls. My girlfriend grabbed my arm, and we ran to the living room, locking every door, shutting the blinds. For an hour, we could hear it outside, scratching at the brick, its claws rasping over the walls. Sometimes it would pause, and we'd hear it breathing, heavy and wet, like a huge animal straining for air. Every now and then it would circle the house, footsteps crunching on the gravel, its shadow sliding past the windows. We sat together on the couch, barely breathing, afraid to even speak. Time stretched out, every second feeling like an eternity. At some point, the scratching stopped, but we still heard it pacing back and forth outside the front door, heavy steps thudding against the porch. It must have gone on for 3 hours or more, just walking, waiting. At last, sometime after 1 a.m., the sound stopped. The silence was almost worse. Every creak of the house, every shift in the wind, made us jump. We waited another hour before we even thought about moving. When we finally went to the bedroom, neither of us slept. We lay in bed, shaking, listening to the quiet. The next morning we went outside to look. The brick was scratched and scarred, long gouges dug into the mortar. There were muddy footprints on the porch, far too big to be human. I don't know what we saw that night. I don't want to know. Jim called me a few days later, his voice tight and nervous. He said he hadn't slept, kept seeing things in the shadows. I told him what happened, and he just got quiet. "It's following us," he said finally. "Whatever it is, it's not done." Now, even in broad daylight, I find myself glancing at the woods, looking for movement. I keep the doors locked, the blinds closed. I haven't hunted since. Sometimes late at night, I wake up and swear I hear heavy footsteps outside, a slow, steady breathing, like something waiting for me to slip up, to break the silence. I wish I could forget what I saw, but I can't. It's always there, just out of sight, waiting. If you ever find yourself in the woods at night, and the world goes quiet, if you see a deer that doesn't quite look right, with white eyes and torn skin, don't stop to look. Don't run. Just leave, and pray that whatever is out there decides to let you go. Some things aren't meant to be seen, and some mistakes once made can't ever be taken back.